They said she was broken, damaged goods, a woman whose womb would never quicken with life. In 1878, Silver Creek, that whisper was a death sentence, socially, romantically, completely. But Evelyn Moore didn't know that one cowboy with Texas dust on his boots and kindness in his sky-blue eyes would prove them all wrong. This is the story of how love rewrote destiny, how faith conquered medicine, and how a barren woman became a mother of 4. Stay until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this miracle travels. The September sun hung low over Silver Creek, Colorado, painting the rutted main street in shades of amber and rust. Evelyn Moore stood outside Dr. Hutchinson's office, her gloved hand pressed against the weathered wooden door frame, trying to remember how to breathe. Inside her reticule, folded into a tight square, was a piece of paper that had just shattered her entire world into pieces too small to ever fit back together. Congenital uterine abnormality. Childbearing. Impossible. The medical terms felt like stones in her throat. She'd read them 3 times, her eyes tracing the doctor's cramped handwriting as if repetition might change the meaning, might somehow transform that brutal diagnosis into something she could survive. But the words remained unchanged, as immovable as the Rocky Mountains looming beyond the town's edge. 24 years old, and her future had just been amputated. Evelyn forced herself to step away from the door, to place one foot in front of the other on the wooden boardwalk. Her boots, practical brown leather, slightly scuffed at the toes, made hollow sounds that seemed too loud in the afternoon quiet. Mrs. Henderson was sweeping the porch of the general store. She looked up, her weathered face creasing into what might have been sympathy or might have been curiosity. In a town like Silver Creek, the two were often indistinguishable. "Miss Moore," the older woman called out. "You feeling poorly? You look a bit peaked." Evelyn manufactured a smile, pulling it across her face like a curtain. "Just the autumn chill, Mrs. Henderson. Nothing a hot cup of tea won't cure." It was a lie, of course, but lies were currency in small towns, and Evelyn had just learned she'd be spending them for the rest of her life. She walked past the saloon, where piano music tinkled through the swinging doors, past the livery stable with its familiar smells of hay and leather and horse sweat, past the church with its white steeple piercing the darkening sky like an accusation. Her small cottage sat at the edge of town, near the schoolhouse where she taught, a tidy building with yellow curtains she'd sewn herself and a garden she tended with the same care she gave her students. Inside, the silence was absolute. Evelyn set her reticule on the kitchen table, removed her hat with its modest ribbon, and finally, allowed herself to collapse into the Windsor chair her father had made before he died. The sob that tore from her throat sounded animal, raw, nothing like the controlled voice she used to teach multiplication tables and proper penmanship to Silver Creek's children. Other people's children. Always other people's children. She pressed her fist against her mouth, trying to contain the grief, but it was like trying to hold back a flood with a teacup. 24 years of dreaming, of imagining a daughter with her mother's dark hair, a son with his father's laugh, a house filled with the chaos and joy of family. All of it dissolved in the space of one medical examination. Dr. Hutchinson had been kind in his way. He was a stern man with gray mutton chops and hands that smelled of carbolic acid, but his voice had been gentle when he delivered the news. "Miss Moore," he'd said, gesturing for her to sit down after the examination. "I'm afraid the news is not what we hoped." She'd known immediately. Something in his tone, in the way he couldn't quite meet her eyes. "Tell me plainly, doctor. I'm not a delicate flower." He'd appreciated that, she could tell. "Your uterus is malformed. It's a condition you were born with, nothing you did or didn't do. But it means—" He'd paused, choosing his words carefully. "It means that conception is extraordinarily unlikely, and even if it were to occur, carrying a child to term would be virtually impossible." Virtually? She'd seized on that word like a drowning woman grabbing driftwood. "Miss Moore," his voice had been firmer then, almost stern, "I would be doing you a grave disservice to offer false hope. In 30 years of practice, I've seen this condition perhaps 5 times. Not one of those women ever bore a child. You need to prepare yourself for a life without motherhood." A life without motherhood. In 1878, in a frontier town where women were valued primarily for their ability to populate the territory, that was tantamount to being told she had no value at all. Now, alone in her kitchen, Evelyn let herself cry until her throat was raw and her eyes burned. She cried for the children she'd never hold, for the lullabies she'd never sing, for the future she'd spent years constructing in her imagination, brick by careful brick, only to watch it crumble to dust. When the tears finally subsided, leaving her hollow and aching, she stood and moved mechanically through her evening routine. She lit the lamps. She stoked the fire in the cast-iron stove. She put the kettle on for tea she didn't want. Through her kitchen window, she could see lights beginning to glow in other houses, families gathering for supper, children being called in from play, the ordinary miracles of domestic life that would forever be closed to her. The knock on her door came just as the kettle began to whistle. Evelyn dabbed at her eyes with her apron, trying to erase the evidence of her breakdown. Just a moment. On her porch stood Sarah Bennett, her closest friend and fellow teacher at the school. Sarah was younger by 2 years, pretty in a wholesome way, with blonde braids and a spattering of freckles across her nose. She was also 6 months pregnant, her belly swelling beneath her practical gray dress. "Evelyn?" Sarah's smile faded when she saw her friend's face. "Oh no! Oh, Evelyn, what did the doctor say?" Evelyn had intended to lie, to protect herself behind walls of polite deflection. But Sarah's genuine concern, the worry in her blue eyes, broke through her defenses. "I can't have children," she said simply. "Ever." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. No, that can't be right. Maybe you should see another doctor, someone in Denver." "Sarah." Evelyn's voice was gentle but firm. "Dr. Hutchinson was very certain it's a physical impossibility." For a moment, Sarah just stood there, her eyes filling with tears, crying the tears Evelyn had exhausted. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her friend, her pregnant belly pressing between them like a reminder of everything Evelyn would never have. "I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered. "Evelyn, I'm so sorry." They stood like that for a long moment, on the threshold between the gathering darkness outside and the warm lamplight within. When they finally separated, Evelyn managed a wan smile. "Come in. The tea is ready, and I'd rather talk about anything else. How are you feeling? Is the baby still keeping you up at night?" Sarah followed her inside, chattering about her pregnancy symptoms with a new self-consciousness, clearly trying to be sensitive. Evelyn appreciated the effort, even as each mention of morning sickness and baby kicks felt like a small blade between her ribs. They sat at the kitchen table, teacups cradled in their hands, and talked about school matters, about the new family that had moved in above the hardware store, about Mrs. Thornton's scandalous new hat with its excessive feathers, normal things, safe things. But eventually Sarah's innate honesty couldn't be contained. "Evelyn, what will you do?" "Do?" Evelyn set down her cup carefully. "I'll do what I've always done. I'll teach. I'll grade papers and plan lessons and help children learn to read. I'll tend my garden and attend church socials and— Will you tell people?" The question hung in the air between them. Evelyn looked down at her hands, at the ink stains on her fingers from that afternoon's spelling tests, from the life she'd built for herself independent of marriage and motherhood. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me wants to keep it private, to maintain some dignity. But in a town this size, She laughed without humor. "Dr. Hutchinson's wife is the biggest gossip in 3 counties. By tomorrow afternoon, everyone will know that the school teacher is barren." Sarah winced at the word, but didn't contradict it. They both knew how small-town social dynamics worked. "Maybe it won't be as bad as you think," Sarah offered weakly. But it was worse. By Sunday morning, when Evelyn walked into the First Presbyterian Church for services, the whispers followed her like a cold wind. She could feel eyes on her back, hear the soft murmurs that died when she passed. Mrs. Carlyle actually moved her skirts aside when Evelyn slid into a pew, as if infertility were contagious. Reverend Thomas preached about Ruth and Naomi, about faithfulness in difficult circumstances, and Evelyn wondered if he'd chosen the text specifically for her benefit. When they stood to sing Amazing Grace, she kept her voice low, not wanting to draw attention. After the service, as the congregation gathered on the church steps in the autumn sunshine, Evelyn found herself suddenly alone. Women who usually sought her out to discuss their children's progress in school now clustered in groups that closed ranks when she approached. She stood by the white picket fence pretending to admire the late-blooming roses and tried to ignore the burning in her eyes. "Such a shame," a voice carried clearly across the yard. Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife, speaking to a cluster of other matrons. "And she's a nice enough girl. Pretty, too. But what man would want a wife who can't give him children?" "It's God's will," Mrs. Thornton added, her voice dripping with false piety. "Perhaps there's some sin that hasn't been repented." Evelyn's hands clenched in her skirts. She wanted to scream, to rage, to ask what sin a child could commit that would warrant such punishment. Instead, she turned and walked away with measured steps, her head high, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She made it home before the tears came again. The following days established a pattern that would define Evelyn's autumn. At school, she threw herself into teaching with renewed fervor, staying late to prepare elaborate lessons, organizing a spelling bee that had the whole town talking. Her students adored her, bringing her wildflowers and crude drawings, their innocent affection a balm to her wounded spirit. But outside the schoolhouse, the isolation deepened. Invitations to social gatherings dried up. Women who had been friendly now offered tight-lipped smiles and hurried past. Even Sarah, pregnant and sympathetic, found herself pulled away by other expectant mothers, included in a sisterhood that Evelyn could never join. The men were worse in their way. The unmarried ones who had previously shown interest, farmers and shopkeepers and ranch hands, now avoided her as if she were cursed. The married ones looked at her with a mixture of pity and relief that they hadn't made the mistake of courting her. In the general store one afternoon, Mr. Peterson, a widower with 2 young sons, had been on the verge of asking if she'd accompany him to the harvest dance. She'd seen it in his face, the way he'd worked up his courage. But then Mrs. Henderson had bustled over, had whispered something in his ear, and his expression had changed from hopeful to awkward. He'd made a hasty excuse and left, his purchases abandoned on the counter. Mrs. Henderson had given Evelyn a look that was equal parts sympathy and satisfaction. "It's for the best, dear. A man with motherless boys needs a woman who can give him more children. It wouldn't be right to mislead him." Evelyn had bought her flour and sugar and left without responding, her throat too tight for words. October arrived with frost on the windows and a coldness that had nothing to do with the weather. Evelyn found herself retreating more and more into her cottage, into her books, and her lesson plans. She read late into the night, Shakespeare and Dickens and Austen, stories of women whose worth wasn't measured solely by their ability to bear children. She wrote long letters to her sister in Boston, carefully omitting the details of her diagnosis, painting a picture of her life that was lonely but not tragic. At school, she discovered that her students had begun treating her differently too. Not the children themselves, they were still loving and eager to please, but their parents had clearly spoken to them. Little Emma Whitfield, only 6 years old, had asked one afternoon with heartbreaking innocence, "Miss Moore, my mama says you can't have babies. Does that mean you're sad all the time?" Evelyn had knelt down to the girl's level, had brushed a blonde curl from her forehead, and said gently, "Sometimes I'm sad, Emma, but when I'm with you and the other children, I'm happy. You're all very special to me." Emma had thrown her arms around Evelyn's neck and whispered, "You can share my mama if you want. She has lots of babies." The simple generosity of it had made Evelyn cry in the cloakroom after the children left. By mid-October, Evelyn had resigned herself to her new reality. She would be the spinster schoolteacher, the woman people pitied and avoided in equal measure. She would pour her love into other people's children and find satisfaction in small things. A well-taught lesson, a beautiful sunset, a book that transported her somewhere else. It wouldn't be the life she dreamed of, but it would be a life nonetheless. She was grading arithmetic papers one evening when she heard the commotion outside. Horses galloping into town, men shouting, the kind of noise that usually meant trouble. Evelyn set down her red pencil and moved to the window. A group of ranch hands was riding up the main street, whooping and hollering, clearly celebrating something. They pulled up in front of the saloon, dismounting in a cloud of dust. Most of them Evelyn recognized, local boys who worked the surrounding ranches. But among them was a stranger. He was tall, taller than the others, with broad shoulders and a confident way of moving. Even from a distance, she could see that he was handsome in a rugged way. Dark hair curling from beneath his Stetson, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. He laughed at something one of the other men said, the sound carrying clear across the evening air, rich and warm. Then he looked up, directly at her window, and Evelyn stepped back instinctively, her heart inexplicably racing. She told herself it meant nothing. He was just another cowboy, probably passing through, certainly not someone who would give her a second glance even if he stayed. She returned to her papers, determined to put him out of her mind. But that night, she dreamed of sky-blue eyes and a smile that felt like sunshine. The stranger's name, she learned the next day, was Colt Danner. He'd come from Texas, had bought the old Merrick ranch that had been sitting vacant for 2 years, and was in the process of rebuilding it. Sarah, who heard everything through her husband's work at the bank, reported this information breathlessly during their after-school meeting. "They say he's very capable," Sarah said, sorting through primers for the younger students. "Paid cash for the property, which means he must have done well down in Texas. And Evelyn," she paused dramatically, "he's not married." Evelyn didn't look up from the attendance book she was updating. "Good for him. I'm sure every eligible woman in town will be throwing herself at his feet." "That's not what I meant." Sarah's voice was gentle. "I just thought you might want to know." "Sarah," Evelyn set down her pen and met her friend's eyes. "I appreciate what you're trying to do. But we both know that no man, especially not a successful rancher looking to build a future, is going to be interested in a woman who can't give him children. It's pointless to even think about it." Sarah opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again, her face falling, because they both knew Evelyn was right. The harvest fair arrived at the end of October, transforming the town square into a riot of color and activity. Despite her isolation, Evelyn attended. It was expected of her as the school teacher, and besides, she'd helped several of her students prepare entries for the children's competitions. She wasn't going to let her personal misery rob them of her support. The square was crowded with townsfolk admiring prize pumpkins and quilts, sampling preserves and pies, watching children race and play. A fiddler was tuning up for the evening dance, and the air smelled of wood smoke and cinnamon and the peculiar dusty sweetness of autumn. Evelyn moved through the crowds, complimenting her students' entries, making polite conversation with parents who were civil, if not warm. She was judging the children's drawing competition when she heard a commotion behind her. "Higher, Mr. Danner! I want to touch the sky!" She turned to see the tall stranger, Colt Danner, with little Tommy Henderson perched on his shoulders, both of them laughing as Tommy stretched his arms toward the sky. The boy's mother stood nearby, smiling indulgently, apparently unconcerned about her son's rough play with a relative stranger. As Evelyn watched, Colt swung Tommy down and immediately found himself surrounded by other children, all clamoring for their turn. He obliged them patiently, giving each child a ride on his shoulders or swinging the smaller ones in wide circles that made them shriek with delight. "He's good with children, isn't he?" Evelyn jumped. Mrs. Henderson had appeared at her elbow, watching her son play with approval. "Mr. Danner just arrived in town, but already the children have taken to him. That's always a good sign of a man's character, I say." Before Evelyn could respond, disaster struck. Young Tommy, in his excitement, had climbed onto a hay bale and launched himself at Colt, who caught him easily, but in doing so knocked into Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife. She stumbled backward, her prize-winning apple pie flying from her hands and landing face down in the dirt. There was a moment of horrified silence. Mrs. Patterson's face turned an alarming shade of red. "My pie! That took me all day! You clumsy oaf! Can't you control these wild children?" She wasn't addressing Colt, Evelyn realized with sick dread. She was looking at her, at the schoolteacher who was supposed to keep the town's children well behaved. "I apologize, Mrs. Patterson," Evelyn began, stepping forward. "It was an accident that wouldn't have happened if you maintained proper discipline," Mrs. Patterson snapped. "But then, what can we expect? A woman who can't even manage to—" "Ma'am." Colt's voice cut through her tirade, quiet, but with an edge of steel. "The fault was mine. I should have been more careful." He pulled several bills from his pocket and offered them to her. "Please, allow me to compensate you for the pie." Mrs. Patterson looked between the money and Colt, clearly torn between indignation and greed. Greed won. She snatched the bills and stalked away, muttering under her breath. Colt knelt down to Tommy, who looked near tears. "Hey now, partner, no harm done. But maybe we should save the flying lessons for another day, yeah?" Tommy nodded miserably, then ran to his mother. The other children had scattered, the festive mood broken. Colt stood, brushing hay from his pants, and for the first time his eyes met Evelyn's directly. Up close, they were indeed sky blue, bright and clear, with smile lines at the corners that suggested he laughed often. But right now they held only concern. "You all right, ma'am? Old Bat had no right to speak to you like that." Evelyn found herself momentarily speechless. When was the last time someone had defended her? Yes, I'm fine. Thank you for intervening and for not letting Tommy take the blame." Colt shrugged. "Wasn't the boy's fault. He was just having fun." He tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You're the school teacher, Miss Moore, right?" "That's right." "Heard a lot about you. Folks say you're the best teacher this town's ever had." Evelyn's laugh was bitter. "Folks say a lot of things." Something in her tone made his expression shift, become more serious. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Sarah appeared at Evelyn's side, slightly breathless. "Evelyn, there you are. I need your help with—" She noticed Colt and stopped short, her eyes widening. "Oh, Mr. Danner, I didn't mean to interrupt." "No interruption, ma'am. I was just introducing myself to Miss Moore." He tipped his hat to both women. "Ladies, enjoy the fair." He walked away, his long strides carrying him toward the livestock pens, and Sarah immediately grabbed Evelyn's arm. "He was talking to you. Did you see the way he looked at you?" "He was being polite, Sarah, nothing more." "No, there was something more. I saw—" "Don't!" Evelyn's voice came out sharper than she intended. "Please, Sarah, don't give me hope where there is none. He's a rancher. He'll need sons to help work the land, daughters to— Her voice broke. "He'll need a real woman, not someone broken." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "You're not broken, Evelyn. You're barren, useless, defective." Evelyn pulled away. "I need some air. I'll see you at school tomorrow." She fled the fairgrounds, walking quickly toward home as the sun set and the temperature dropped. Behind her, she could hear the fiddler starting up, the first notes of the dance that would go on long into the night. She imagined Colt Danner dancing with pretty, whole women, choosing the one who would become his wife, who would fill his ranch house with children. She was so lost in her bitter thoughts that she didn't hear the footsteps behind her until a voice called out, rough and slurred, "Well now, if it isn't the dried-up schoolteacher, all alone." Evelyn spun around. 3 men had followed her from the fair, drifters by the look of them, dusty and unshaven, smelling of cheap whiskey. She recognized them vaguely. They'd been hanging around the saloon for the past week, doing odd jobs for drink money. "Gentlemen," she said, keeping her voice steady, "the fair is back that way. I'm just heading home." "That's not very friendly," the tallest one said, stepping closer. "We just wanted some company. Pretty thing like you shouldn't be walking alone at night. I'm perfectly capable of walking alone. Now please, let me pass." Instead, they spread out, blocking her path. Evelyn's heart began to race. The street was deserted, everyone still at the fair. Her cottage was another block away, too far to run. "We heard you can't have babies," the second man said, his grin ugly. "That means you can have all kinds of fun without consequences, don't it?" Fear, sharp and cold, shot through Evelyn's chest. She opened her mouth to scream, "The lady said no!" The voice came from the shadows behind the men, low and dangerous. They spun around, and Colt Danner stepped into the lamplight. He wasn't smiling now. His hand rested on the pistol at his hip, his entire bearing radiating quiet menace. "This ain't your business, cowboy," the tall drifter said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. "Miss Moore's safety is everyone's business." Colt's eyes were hard as flint. "You boys have about 3 seconds to apologize to the lady and walk away." After that, he let the threat hang unspoken. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then the 3 men looked at each other, looked at Colt's gun, and apparently decided discretion was the wiser course. They shuffled past Evelyn, muttering half-hearted apologies, and disappeared into the night. Evelyn sagged against the nearest building, her legs suddenly weak. Colt holstered his pistol and approached slowly, his hands visible and non-threatening. You okay, Miss Moore? I. She had to swallow before she could continue. Yes. Thank you. Again. You seem to be making a habit of rescuing me. Happy to make it a habit, if needed. His smile was gentle. Can I walk you home? Make sure those boys don't double back? She should say no, should maintain distance, protect her heart, but she was shaken, and he was kind, and the thought of walking the rest of the way alone made her stomach clench. Yes, she whispered. Please. They walked in silence for the first half block, the sounds of the distant fair floating on the cool air. Then Colt spoke, his voice thoughtful. I grew up with 2 sisters and a mama who could outshoot most men. Made me real aware of how vulnerable women can be in places like this. Those boys won't bother you again, but if they do, you let me know. You're very kind. Evelyn glanced up at him. But you don't owe me any protection. Not about owing, it's about what's right. They reached her cottage, its yellow curtains glowing warmly in the windows. Evelyn climbed the porch steps and turned, intending to thank him and send him on his way. But the words died in her throat when she saw how he was looking at her. I missed you, Evelyn, he said quietly. More than I should have, given we just met today. Her breath caught. You don't know me. I know you stood up there judging children's drawings with a smile, even though I saw how some of those women were treating you. I know you were worried about young Tommy taking blame for something that wasn't his fault. I know you've got kindness in you and strength. He paused. And I know that whatever people are whispering about you, whatever reason they're treating you like you're less than you are, I don't give a damn about it. Tears pricked Evelyn's eyes. You should. It matters. Not to me. He took a step back, giving her space. But I can see I've overstepped. I apologize. Thank you for letting me walk you home, Miss Moore. He turned to go, and Evelyn felt something break open in her chest, something that had been locked tight since that day in Dr. Hutchinson's office. She thought of years stretching ahead, of loneliness and whispers, of protecting herself behind walls that grew higher each day. And she thought of this stranger with sky-blue eyes who had defended her twice, who looked at her like she mattered, who said he'd missed her when he barely knew her. Wait, she called out. Would you like to come in for coffee? Colt turned back, surprise and something warmer lighting his face. I'd like that very much. And as Evelyn opened her door and welcomed him into her small cottage, into the life she'd been certain would remain forever empty, she felt the first fragile flutter of something she'd thought was dead. Hope. The coffee was terrible, too strong and slightly bitter, but neither of them seemed to notice. They sat across from each other at Evelyn's small kitchen table, the lamp between them casting warm shadows on the simple furniture, and talked. Really talked, in a way Evelyn hadn't talked to anyone since before her diagnosis. Colt told her about Texas, about growing up on a ranch that had been in his family for 3 generations, about learning to rope and ride before he could properly read. His voice carried the rhythms of the South, softening consonants and stretching vowels in a way that was pleasant to hear. My daddy always said a man's worth isn't in his book learning, it's in his character and his work ethic, Colt said, wrapping both hands around his coffee cup. But after he passed and I took over the ranch, I started seeing where he was wrong about that. Couldn't keep proper accounts, couldn't read contracts before signing them. Nearly lost the whole place because I trusted a man's word instead of reading the fine print. But you didn't lose it, Evelyn said softly. No. My sister Rachel, she's the smart one. She came home from her teaching job in Austin and sorted out the mess, taught me enough to get by. His jaw tightened. But it wasn't enough. When I sold the ranch and came north looking for new opportunities, I promised myself I'd learn to read properly. Not just enough to stumble through, but really read, the way educated folks do. Why Silver Creek? Evelyn asked. It's a long way from Texas. Colt's expression grew distant. Rachel died last winter, typhoid, and after that everywhere I looked I saw her. Couldn't escape the grief. So I sold out, took the money, and just started riding north. Ended up here, saw the Merrick place was available, and something about it felt right. Like maybe this was where I was supposed to start over. I'm sorry about your sister, Evelyn said, and meant it. She understood loss, understood the way grief could make familiar places unbearable. Thank you. He met her eyes across the table. What about you? You from Silver Creek originally. Ohio, Evelyn said. Small town outside Cleveland. I came west 3 years ago to teach. My father had died, my mother had remarried, and I wanted, I don't know, adventure, I suppose? Independence? A life that was mine. Seems like you got that, Colt said. Heard nothing but good things about your teaching. Evelyn's laugh was hollow. Teaching is the only thing people approve of. Everything else about me is apparently deficient. The bitterness in her voice made Colt lean forward. What happened, Evelyn? What are they whispering about? She should deflect, should protect herself, but something about the genuine concern in his sky-blue eyes, the way he'd defended her twice already, made her want to trust him. And more than that, he was tired of carrying the secret alone, tired of the weight of it. I saw Dr. Hutchinson a month ago, she said quietly, her eyes fixed on her coffee cup. I'd been having some pain, some irregularities. He examined me and told me that I'm unable to have children. Something wrong with my womb. A defect I was born with. She heard Colt draw in a breath, but she couldn't look up, couldn't bear to see pity or disgust in his face. Dr. Hutchinson's wife is the biggest gossip in the territory, she continued, her voice steady despite the tears threatening. Within days, everyone knew. And in a town like this, a woman who can't provide children is worthless, damaged goods. I've been watching potential suitors vanish, watching women exclude me from their gatherings, watching people look at me with pity or contempt or both. She finally raised her eyes to his. So now you know. I'm the barren schoolteacher. That's what they call me when they think I can't hear. For a long moment, Colt said nothing. He just looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Then he spoke, his voice rough with emotion. Those people are fools. Evelyn blinked. What? Fools, he repeated more forcefully. Anyone who thinks a woman's only worth is in childbearing is a damn fool. Pardon my language, but it's true. He leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. My sister Rachel never married, never had children. But she was the smartest, kindest, most valuable person I ever knew. She taught dozens of kids to read and write, helped our whole community, made the world better just by being in it. Was she worthless because she didn't have babies? No, of course not. Then why are you? The question hung in the air between them. Evelyn opened her mouth to answer, to explain all the reasons why her situation was different, why society's expectations mattered, why a man would never want a wife who couldn't give him children. But under Colt's steady gaze, all those explanations seemed hollow. I don't know, she finally whispered. I do, Colt said firmly. You're not worthless. You're not damaged. You're a woman who teaches children, who stands up for what's right, who has more courage in your little finger than most of those gossips have in their whole bodies. He paused, then added quietly, and any man who can't see that doesn't deserve you. Evelyn felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been frozen solid for weeks. A tear slid down her cheek, then another, but these weren't tears of grief. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of something she was afraid to name. Thank you, she managed. You have no idea what it means to hear someone say that. Colt reached across the table, hesitated, then gently squeezed her hand. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip steady and sure. I mean, every word. They sat like that for a moment, hands clasped across the table, and Evelyn felt the loneliness that had been crushing her for weeks ease just slightly. Here was someone who knew her secret and hadn't run, who had looked at her brokenness and seen value instead of deficiency. It was dangerous, this feeling, but she was too tired to fight it. Colt released her hand and cleared his throat. I should let you get some rest, but I meant what I said earlier, about missing you. I'd like to see you again, if you're willing. Why? The question escaped before Evelyn could stop it. Why me? You're new in town. You could court any woman here. I don't want any woman, Colt interrupted gently. I want to get to know you, if you'll let me. Evelyn thought about warning him off, about protecting him from the social consequences of associating with her. But the selfish part of her, The lonely part that was so tired of being alone won out. "I'd like that," she said. The smile that broke across Colt's face was like sunrise. "Good. Then how about this? I still need to learn to read properly. Would you consider tutoring me? I'd pay your regular rate, of course." "You don't need to pay me. I insist. This would be business, proper lessons. Though, his smile turned slightly mischievous. "I wouldn't object to more coffee afterward, even if it is terrible." Evelyn laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in weeks. "My coffee is not terrible. Ma'am, I've drunk trail coffee made from grounds used 3 times over, and I can honestly say this is worse." "Get out of my house," Evelyn said, but she was smiling. Colt stood, retrieving his hat from where he'd hung it by the door. "When should I come for my first lesson? Thursday afternoon? After school?" "Thursday it is." He settled his hat on his head, then paused at the door. "Evelyn, those men earlier, if they or anyone else bothers you, you let me know. Promise me." "I promise." "Good night, then." "Good night, Colt." After he left, Evelyn sat in her quiet kitchen for a long time, her cold coffee forgotten, her hand still warm where he'd held it. She told herself not to hope, not to dream, not to read too much into simple kindness. But as she finally rose to wash the cups and bank the fire, she found herself humming softly, a tune she hadn't hummed since before that terrible day in Dr. Hutchinson's office. The next morning at school, Evelyn found herself watching the clock more than usual, anticipating Thursday with an eagerness that felt both thrilling and terrifying. Her students noticed the change in her mood, responding to her renewed energy with enthusiasm. Even little Emma Whitfield commented that Miss Moore seemed happy again. Sarah noticed too. During their lunch break on Wednesday, as they supervised the children's recess, she pulled Evelyn aside. "Something's different," Sarah said, studying her friend's face. "You're smiling, really smiling, not just pretending." Evelyn felt her cheeks warm. "I don't know what you mean." "Does it have anything to do with a certain Texas cowboy?" "Sarah, I saw him walk you home from the fair," Sarah said gently. "And before you protest, half the town saw it too. The gossips are having a field day." The happiness drained from Evelyn's face. "Of course they are. I should have known better. I shouldn't let him come for lessons. I'll just ruin his reputation." "Stop." Sarah gripped her arm. "I didn't tell you to scare you. I told you because you should know that not everyone is gossiping unkindly. Mrs. Henderson told me she thinks it's wonderful that Mr. Danner is interested in education. And several of the younger women are positively green with envy that he chose to walk you home instead of dancing with them." "He's not interested in me that way," Evelyn protested weakly. "He's coming for reading lessons, that's all." Sarah's look was knowing. "If you say so. But Evelyn, even if he is just coming for lessons, let yourself enjoy it. You deserve some happiness." Thursday afternoon arrived with agonizing slowness. Evelyn found herself checking her appearance in the small mirror 3 times, smoothing her hair and straightening her collar until she forced herself to stop. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. Colt needed help with reading. She was a teacher. This was what she did. The knock came precisely at 4 o'clock. Colt stood on her porch, hat in hand, looking slightly nervous. He'd clearly made an effort. His shirt was clean and pressed, his hair damp from recent washing, his boots polished. Evelyn's heart did a traitorous flutter. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. "I've set up some materials at the table." She'd prepared a simple assessment, basic primers, some newspaper articles, a page from a novel. Colt settled into the chair and gamely attempted to read aloud from the primer. He could manage it, but slowly, sounding out words syllable by syllable, stumbling over anything longer than 2 syllables. "I know it's bad," he said, frustration evident in his voice. "I can read contracts and such, but it takes me forever, and half the time I'm not sure I'm understanding it right." "It's not bad," Evelyn said honestly. "You have the foundations. You just need practice and some strategies to improve your fluency. We can work on that." Over the next hour, she guided him through exercises designed to strengthen his reading skills. Colt was a dedicated student, focused, determined, unashamed to ask questions when he didn't understand. Evelyn found herself relaxing into the familiar rhythm of teaching, forgetting to be self-conscious. simply enjoying the work. "You're a natural teacher," Colt said when they finally took a break. "Patient but firm. No wonder the kids love you." "Teaching is easy," Evelyn said. "It's everything else that's hard." "Speaking of everything else," Colt hesitated. "I heard some talk in town today about me coming here for lessons." Evelyn's stomach dropped. "I should have warned you. Associating with me will damage your reputation. People will think—" "Let them think," Colt interrupted. "I don't give a damn. Pardon me. I don't care what small-minded gossips think. I came here because I need to learn to read better, and you're the best teacher in the territory. That's all the justification I need. But no buts." His voice was gentle but firm. "Unless you want me to stop coming. If this is making your life harder, I'll find another way." Evelyn looked at him, at his honest face, his sky-blue eyes, the genuine concern written in every line of his expression. She thought about the loneliness of the past weeks, about how alive she'd felt during their lesson, about the warmth of simple companionship. "Don't stop coming," she said quietly. "Please." The smile he gave her was worth every piece of gossip in Silver Creek. They fell into a routine. Twice a week, Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, Colt came for his lessons. They worked on reading comprehension, on expanding his vocabulary, on building his confidence with written material. He was a quick study, soaking up knowledge with the hunger of someone who'd been denied it too long. And after each lesson, they had coffee. Terrible coffee that became a running joke between them, and talked about everything and nothing, about his ranch and her school, about books and horses and dreams, about his childhood in Texas and hers in Ohio, about Rachel and about Evelyn's father, about loss and hope, and starting over. Slowly, carefully, they built a friendship that felt more precious than gold. But Silver Creek's gossips didn't sleep. The whispers grew louder, more pointed. Mrs. Patterson loudly wondered what kind of lessons were really happening in that cottage. Mr. Henderson, the store owner, made pointed remarks about impropriety. Even Reverend Thomas spoke from the pulpit about the importance of maintaining appearances and avoiding the near occasion of sin. Evelyn tried to ignore it, but the constant scrutiny wore on her. She found herself looking over her shoulder, jumping at shadows, wondering if her attempt at happiness was selfish and wrong. 3 weeks into their lessons, Evelyn made a decision. When Colt arrived for his Thursday session, she met him at the door with resolve written on her face. "We need to stop," she said without preamble. "The lessons, all of it." Colt's expression darkened. "What happened?" "Nothing happened. That's the problem." Evelyn wrapped her arms around herself. "You don't see it because you're new here, because you're a man. But I see how people look at us, at me. They think we're—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "They think we're courting," Colt said flatly. "They think I'm fool enough to pursue a woman who can't give me children." The bluntness of it made Evelyn flinch. "Yes. And that bothers you?" "It should bother you. You're trying to establish yourself here, build a ranch, become part of this community. Being associated with me will only hurt your chances of what?" Colt's voice was sharp now, frustrated. "Of being accepted by people whose approval I don't want? Of courting some vapid woman who meets their standards but whom I have no interest in? Evelyn, I don't care what they think." "You should care, because in 6 months or a year, you'll realize they're right. You'll want a family, children to inherit your ranch, and you'll resent me for wasting your time." "Don't tell me what I'll want," Colt interrupted, his voice rising. "Don't put words in my mouth or thoughts in my head. If I'm wasting my time, that's my choice to make, not yours." They stared at each other across the porch, both breathing hard, the air charged with emotion. Then Colt seemed to deflate, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I'm sorry," he said more quietly. "I shouldn't have yelled. But Evelyn, I need you to understand something." He took a step closer, his eyes intense. "These past few weeks, coming here, learning from you, talking with you, it's been the best part of my days, maybe the best part of my time in Colorado. And I'll be damned. Sorry, I'll be blessed if I let a bunch of gossips take that away from us." "But what about later?" Evelyn's voice broke. "What about when you meet someone who can give you what you need? What about when you realize I'm not enough?" "You want to know what I need?" Colt's voice was raw with emotion. "I need someone who makes me laugh. someone who challenges me to be better, someone who doesn't care that I stumble over big words or that my hands are rough from work. Someone who looks at me like I matter, like I'm more than just a pair of strong arms and a bank account. He paused, his eyes locked on hers. I need someone like you. Evelyn felt tears sliding down her cheeks. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying that I'm falling for you, Evelyn Moore. Have been since that first day at the fair when I watched you smile at those children even while the adults treated you like dirt. I'm saying that I don't care about your medical condition, about what you can or can't do. I care about who you are. I can't have children, Evelyn whispered, forcing herself to say it plainly. Ever. That means no sons to help work your ranch, no daughters to carry on your name, no grandchildren, just nothing. Colt closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to gently frame her face, his thumbs brushing away her tears. Then we'll have nothing, he said softly. Just you and me and whatever life we build together. And that will be enough. More than enough. How can you say that? How can you be sure? Because I already lost the person I love most in this world when Rachel died. And it wasn't because she never gave me nieces or nephews. It was because she was Rachel. Because of who she was as a person. His voice was thick with emotion. You remind me of her sometimes. That same strength, that same kindness, and I'll be damned if I let fear or gossip or medical diagnoses rob me of the chance to see where this could go. Evelyn stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs, torn between hope and terror. Everything she'd been taught, everything society said, told her to protect him, to push him away. But the selfish part of her, the part that was so tired of being alone, that craved his company like air, that part was screaming at her to hold on. I'm scared, she admitted. Scared of hoping. Scared of believing this could work. Scared that you'll change your mind and I'll be left more broken than before. I'm scared too, Colt said honestly. Scared of saying the wrong thing, of moving too fast, of somehow messing this up. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. For a long moment, they stood there on her porch, his hand still cradling her face, the autumn twilight deepening around them. Evelyn could hear Mrs. Thornton's dog barking in the distance, could smell wood smoke from someone's chimney, could feel the calluses on Colt's palms against her cheeks. And then, before she could talk herself out of it, before fear could win, she rose up on her toes and kissed him. It was soft and tentative and tasted of salt from her tears. Colt made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer, deepening the kiss, his arms coming around her like he was afraid she'd disappear. Evelyn melted against him, feeling safe and wanted and valuable for the first time since that horrible day in the doctor's office. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Colt rested his forehead against hers. So, he said, his voice rough, are we still stopping the lessons? Evelyn laughed, the sound watery but genuine. No, we're not stopping anything. Good, because I'm only halfway through that novel you assigned, and I need to know if the hero gets the girl. He does, Evelyn said softly, if he's patient and brave and willing to fight for her. Then I'll be all those things, Colt promised, for as long as it takes. After that evening, something fundamental shifted between them. They were careful. Colt always arrived and left at proper times. They kept the curtains open during lessons. They maintained decorum. But anyone with eyes could see the way they looked at each other, the way Colt found excuses to walk past the schoolhouse, the way Evelyn's face lit up when he appeared. The gossips worked themselves into a frenzy. Mrs. Patterson organized a delegation to speak with Reverend Thomas about the scandal. Mr. Henderson pointedly refused to serve Colt at the general store until his wife overruled him. Even some of Evelyn's students' parents began making noises about finding a new teacher for the next term. But something unexpected happened. For every person who condemned them, another defended them. Mrs. Henderson loudly proclaimed that she saw nothing wrong with a woman giving private lessons. And besides, Mr. Danner's intentions were clearly honorable. Sarah used her position as a well-liked young mother to quietly champion Evelyn's character, and several of the ranchers who'd done business with Colt reported that he was honest, hardworking, and a man of integrity. The town began to divide into camps, those who saw scandal and those who saw romance. And slowly, grudgingly, even some of the hardest critics began to soften. It was hard to maintain moral outrage when the supposed sinners were so clearly, genuinely happy. 6 weeks after their first lesson, Colt invited Evelyn to see his ranch. She accepted, riding out on a borrowed mare on a crisp November Saturday. The Merrick place, now the Danner Ranch, sat in a valley surrounded by golden hills. The house was small but solid, the barns newly repaired, the fences straight and true. Colt had clearly been working himself to exhaustion, but the pride in his voice as he showed her around was unmistakable. "It's not much yet," he said, leading her toward the main house. "But it's got good bones, and there's room to grow." The house was sparse, just the basics of bachelor living. But it was clean, and through the windows, Evelyn could see the spectacular view of the valley. She could imagine yellow curtains there, books on those shelves, warmth and life filling the empty spaces. "It's wonderful," she said honestly. "You've done so much already." "I had motivation," Colt said, moving to stand beside her at the window. "Wanted to have something established before I—" He trailed off, suddenly nervous. "Before you what?" Colt turned to face her, his sky-blue eyes serious. "Before I asked you a question I've been wanting to ask for weeks now." Evelyn's heart began to race. "Colt, let me say this," he interrupted gently. "Please, I've been practicing." She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Evelyn Moore, you are the smartest, strongest, most beautiful woman I've ever met. You make me want to be better, to read better, to think better, to live better. When I'm with you, I feel like I'm home in a way I haven't felt since before Rachel died." He took her hands in his. "I know we haven't known each other long. I know there will be people who disapprove. I know you think I don't understand what I'd be giving up, but I do understand. And I'm telling you, I don't care about any of that." Tears were already sliding down Evelyn's cheeks. "I'm not asking you to marry me," Colt continued. "Not yet. I know you need time to trust this, to trust me. But I'm asking permission to court you properly, openly, to let the whole damn town know that I'm pursuing you with honorable intentions. And when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'd be honored to make you my wife." Evelyn couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. All the warnings, all the fears, all the logical reasons to say no, they all faded in the face of his earnest expression, his steady hands holding hers, his willingness to fight for her against an entire town's disapproval. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, you can court me. Properly, openly. And Colt, I'm already more ready than I should be." The kiss he gave her was different from their first, not tentative, but claiming, a promise and a declaration. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling. "Should we tell people?" Evelyn asked. "Make some kind of announcement?" Colt grinned. "Honey, I'm about to walk you through the middle of town on Sunday after church. With you on my arm and my intentions written all over my face, I think they'll figure it out." And he did exactly that. On Sunday, as the congregation filed out of the First Presbyterian Church, Colt Danner walked up to where Evelyn stood alone, offered her his arm, and escorted her down the church steps and through the town square in broad daylight. The whispers exploded like fireworks, but neither of them looked back. That evening, as Evelyn sat in her cottage trying to process the day's events, there was a knock on her door. She opened it to find not Colt, but Reverend Thomas. "Reverend," she said, surprised. "Please, come in." The elderly minister entered, his expression grave. Evelyn's stomach clenched, preparing for condemnation. "Miss Moore," he began, then paused. "Evelyn, I owe you an apology." That was the last thing she'd expected. "Sir?" "I allowed myself to be swayed by gossip and prejudice. I stood in my pulpit and spoke about propriety and appearances when I should have been speaking about grace and compassion." He looked truly troubled. "Mr. Danner came to see me this week. He told me about his intentions toward you, asked for my blessing, and in our conversation he asked me something that's been troubling my conscience ever since." "What did he ask?" "He asked me to show him where in Scripture it says that a woman's worth is determined by her ability to bear children. He asked me to explain how condemning you for a medical condition you didn't choose aligns with Christ's teachings about loving the outcast and defending the vulnerable. Reverend Thomas shook his head. I couldn't answer him, because there is no such scripture. I've been allowing Old Testament tribalism to override New Testament grace. Evelyn felt tears threatening again. Thank you for saying that. I've called a meeting of the church elders for next week. We'll be addressing the treatment you've received from this congregation. It won't change everyone's minds overnight, but it's a start. He moved toward the door, then turned back. That young man loves you, Evelyn. It's written all over him, and I believe you love him too. I do, Evelyn admitted, saying it aloud for the first time. I love him. Then my blessing is yours, both of you. The Reverend smiled. Sometimes God's greatest gifts come in packages we didn't expect. After he left, Evelyn sat in her kitchen, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. Still terrible, she acknowledged with a smile, and thought about how much had changed in 2 short months. She'd gone from utterly alone to courted by a good man, from convinced her life was over to daring to hope it was just beginning. There would still be obstacles, she knew, still gossip and judgment and people who would never approve. The medical reality of her condition hadn't changed. She still couldn't have children, and that still hurt in quiet moments when she let herself think about it. But she had Colt. She had his steady presence, his unwavering support, his blue eyes that looked at her like she was precious. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The knock on her door made her jump. When she opened it, Colt stood there, hat in hand, grinning. I know I wasn't supposed to come by tonight, he said, but I couldn't stay away. Had to make sure you were okay after today. Evelyn pulled him inside, stood on her toes, and kissed him soundly. When she pulled back, his eyes were dazed. I'm more than okay, she said. I'm happy. Genuinely, completely happy. For the first time in months. Good, Colt said, pulling her close. That's all I ever wanted. They stood there in her small kitchen, holding each other, while outside the November wind whispered through the streets of Silver Creek, carrying away the last of autumn's leaves and making room for whatever would come next. Winter arrived early that year, sweeping down from the mountains with a vengeance that turned Silver Creek into a world of white and crystal. The first real snow came on a Tuesday morning in late November, blanketing the town overnight and transforming the rough frontier settlement into something almost magical. Evelyn woke to find her windows frosted in intricate patterns, and when she stepped outside to feed the chickens, the cold bit through her shawl with teeth sharp enough to make her gasp. School was delayed that morning while parents dug pathways through the drifts, and when the children finally arrived, they were pink-cheeked and excited, tracking snow across the wooden floors and chattering about snowmen and sledding. Evelyn found herself caught up in their enthusiasm, allowing an extra-long recess so they could play in the pristine whiteness. She stood at the window watching them, thinking about how much had changed since that terrible September afternoon in Dr. Hutchinson's office. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear the door open behind her until a familiar voice said, "You look like you're 1,000 miles away." Evelyn turned to find Colt stamping snow from his boots, his coat dusted with white, his cheeks reddened from cold. Her heart did that familiar leap it always did when she saw him. "What are you doing here?" she asked, moving toward him. "The roads must be terrible." "Wanted to make sure you were all right. This storm came up fast." He pulled off his gloves, flexing his fingers. "And I brought you something." From inside his coat, he produced a package wrapped in brown paper. Evelyn took it, curious, and carefully unwrapped it to reveal a book, a beautiful leather-bound edition of Jane Eyre. "Colt," she breathed, "this must have cost a fortune." "Ordered it from Denver weeks ago. Been waiting for it to arrive." He looked almost shy. "You mentioned once that it was your favorite, that your copy was falling apart. Thought you deserved a new one." Evelyn ran her fingers over the embossed cover, feeling tears prick her eyes. It was such a thoughtful gift, so perfectly chosen. "Thank you. It's beautiful." "Read me the first page?" Colt asked. "I want to hear how it's supposed to sound." So Evelyn sat at her desk, Colt leaning against it beside her, and read the opening lines of Jane Eyre in a voice soft enough not to disturb the children playing outside. When she finished, Colt was quiet for a long moment. That's why you love teaching, he said finally. Because you see yourself in Jane, the orphan who made her own way, who refused to be less than she was. Evelyn looked up at him, startled by his insight. Yes, exactly yes. Then she got her happy ending, Colt said, his blue eyes intense. After all her struggles, she got Rochester and Ferndean and a life she'd earned. You deserve the same. Before Evelyn could respond, the schoolroom door burst open and children began pouring back in, bringing with them a blast of cold air and the chaos of wet coats and melting snow. Colt straightened, tipping his hat to her. I should go. Just wanted to check on you. He paused at the door. Evelyn? I'm hosting a small gathering at the ranch this Saturday. Nothing fancy, just some of the neighboring ranchers and their families. I'd like you to be there as my guest. It was more than just an invitation, Evelyn understood. It was a public declaration, an introduction to his new community as the woman he was courting. It meant facing people's scrutiny, their questions, their judgments. It meant being brave. What time should I arrive? She asked. The smile that broke across Colt's face was worth every moment of fear. Saturday dawned clear and cold, the sky that particular shade of blue that only winter brings. Sarah helped Evelyn choose her dress, a deep green wool that brought out the color in her eyes, and arranged her dark hair in a style that was elegant without being overly formal. You're nervous, Sarah observed, pinning the final curl into place. Terrified, Evelyn admitted. What if they hate me? What if I embarrass him? Then they're fools, and Colt will defend you. Sarah squeezed her shoulder. You've already survived the worst of Silver Creek's gossip. These ranchers will be nothing compared to Mrs. Patterson's venom. The ride out to Colt's ranch was beautiful, the winter landscape glittering in the afternoon sun. As Evelyn's borrowed mare crested the final hill, she could see smoke rising from the chimney of the ranch house and several horses already tied at the rail. Her stomach clenched with nerves, but she urged the mare forward. Colt met her at the door, his face lighting up when he saw her. You came. Did you think I wouldn't? Hoped you would. Feared you might lose your nerve. He helped her down from the horse, his hands lingering at her waist. You look beautiful, Evelyn. Don't let me embarrass you, she said quietly. Impossible. He offered his arm. Come on. Let me introduce you to some folks who actually have sense. The gathering inside was smaller than Evelyn had feared. Perhaps a dozen people, mostly couples in their 30s and 40s. Colt introduced her to Tom and Martha Jenkins, who ran the spread to the north, to Samuel and Ruth Crawford from the east, to a handful of others whose names blurred together in Evelyn's nervousness. But something unexpected happened. These people, far enough from town to be less caught up in gossip, treated her with simple courtesy. Martha Jenkins immediately drew Evelyn into conversation about teaching, sharing stories of her own children's struggles with reading. Ruth Crawford asked intelligent questions about curriculum and classroom management. The men discussed ranching with Colt, but included Evelyn in the conversation, respecting her opinions when she offered them. For the first time since her diagnosis, Evelyn felt like she was being seen as a person rather than as a medical condition. Dinner was simple but hearty, beef stew and fresh bread, apple pie that Martha had brought. They ate at the long table Colt had built himself, conversation flowing easily, laughter punctuating the evening. Evelyn found herself relaxing, even enjoying herself, as she traded teaching stories with Ruth and debated the merits of different reading primers with Samuel, who served on his local school board. As the evening wore on and guests began to depart, Tom Jenkins pulled Colt aside. Evelyn pretended not to listen, but she couldn't help overhearing. That's a fine woman you've got there, Danner. Smart, well-spoken, pretty too. Don't let her slip away. Don't intend to, Colt replied. Heard some talk in town about her. Some medical situation. Tom's voice was careful. That true? Evelyn froze, waiting for Colt's response. What's true is that she's the best woman I've ever met, and I'd be honored if she'd have me. Colt's voice was firm. Anything else is private business. Fair enough? Tom clapped him on the shoulder. Just wanted to make sure you knew what you were getting into, but I can see you do. She's a keeper. After the last guest departed, Evelyn helped Colt clear the dishes, working in comfortable silence. When the kitchen was clean, he built up the fire and they sat together on the settee he'd moved in front of the hearth. "Thank you for tonight," Evelyn said softly. "Your friends were wonderful." "They liked you, I could tell." Colt pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "Tom said I'd be a fool to let you go." "Tom doesn't know about my condition. Tom knows I'm courting you seriously. That's all that matters to him." Colt tilted her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. "Evelyn, when are you going to believe that this doesn't change how I feel about you?" "I want to believe it. I do. But there are moments when I think about the future, about what you're giving up, and it terrifies me. What if 10 years from now you wake up and regret choosing me? What if you resent me for not being able to give you children?" "What if I don't?" Colt countered. "What if 10 years from now I wake up next to you and feel nothing but grateful? What if we build a life so full and rich that we never feel like something's missing?" "How can you be so certain?" "Because I know myself. Because I've thought about this from every angle. Because I watched my sister Rachel live a full, meaningful life without children of her own, and she never once seemed to regret it." He took Evelyn's hand, pressing it to his chest where she could feel his heart beating. "My heart doesn't care about biology or medical diagnoses. It just knows it wants you." Evelyn closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her. She wanted so desperately to believe, to trust, to leap into this future he was offering. But the fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach. "I need time," she whispered. "I need to be sure I'm not being selfish, that I'm not trapping you in a marriage you'll regret." "Take all the time you need," Colt said gently. "I'm not going anywhere." The weeks that followed were a strange mixture of joy and tension. Colt's courtship continued. He walked her home from school, attended church services sitting beside her, took her on rides through the snowy countryside. With every public appearance, they faced scrutiny. Some of it was softening, particularly from people who saw how happy they were together. But some remained harsh, judgmental, convinced that their relationship was either scandalous or tragic. Mrs. Patterson, in particular, seemed determined to break them apart. She cornered Evelyn outside the general store one frigid December morning, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Miss Moore, I feel it's my Christian duty to warn you," she began, her voice dripping with false concern. "You're ruining that man's future. A rancher needs sons, needs a family to build a legacy. By encouraging his attentions, you're being selfish and cruel." Evelyn felt the familiar shame rising, but before she could respond, another voice cut in. "Mrs. Patterson, I feel it's my Christian duty to remind you that judgment belongs to God, not to bitter old women with nothing better to do than tear others down." Both women turned to see Mrs. Henderson standing in the doorway of the general store, arms crossed, her weathered face set in stern lines. "I was simply trying to," Mrs. Patterson began. "To meddle in business that's not yours," Mrs. Henderson interrupted. "I've known Evelyn Moore for 3 years, and she's a woman of character and integrity. If Colt Danner has chosen her, then he's chosen well. Now either buy something or move along. You're blocking my doorway." Mrs. Patterson huffed and stalked away. Mrs. Henderson turned to Evelyn with a gentler expression. "Don't let her poison your happiness, dear. That woman's been bitter since her own husband left her 20 years ago. She can't stand seeing others find joy." "Thank you," Evelyn managed. "You didn't have to defend me." "Course I did. You're part of this community, same as anyone. And for what it's worth, I think you and that cowboy make a fine pair." Mrs. Henderson smiled. "He looks at you like you hung the moon." As Christmas approached, the town began preparations for the annual holiday social at the church. It was the biggest event of the winter, a chance for the isolated community to gather, celebrate, and forget the harsh realities of frontier life for an evening. Evelyn had always enjoyed it in previous years, but this year she dreaded it. It would be her and Colt's first major public appearance as a couple, and she knew the gossips would be watching their every move. "We don't have to go," Colt said when she expressed her concerns. They were sitting in her cottage, where he'd come for his regular reading lesson, though these days the lessons often dissolved into conversation and stolen kisses. "Yes, we do. If we hide, it just gives them more ammunition." Evelyn sighed. "I just wish people would focus on their own lives instead of dissecting ours." Then let's give them something to talk about. Colt's eyes held a hint of mischief. Let's show up and have such a good time that they can't help but see how happy we are. The night of the social arrived with fresh snow and temperatures so cold that frost formed on the inside of windows. Evelyn dressed carefully in her best gown, a deep burgundy silk that had belonged to her mother, and wrapped herself in every shawl she owned. When Colt arrived to escort her, he looked devastatingly handsome in a black suit that made his blue eyes even more striking. "You're staring," he said, amused. "You're worth staring at," Evelyn replied, making him laugh. The church was warm and bright, candles and lanterns casting golden light over decorations of pine boughs and holly. Nearly the entire town had turned out, and the noise of conversation and laughter filled the space. As Evelyn and Colt entered, several heads turned, and she felt the familiar prickle of being watched. But Colt simply tightened his grip on her arm and led her confidently into the room. They greeted Reverend Thomas, spoke with Sarah and her husband, made polite conversation with various townspeople. Some were warm, some were coolly civil, but no one was openly hostile. When the musicians struck up the first dance, Colt turned to Evelyn with a bow. "May I have this dance, Miss Moore?" "I'd be honored, Mr. Danner." They moved on to the dance floor, and Evelyn was acutely aware of the eyes following them. But as Colt pulled her into the waltz, his hand warm and steady at her waist, the rest of the room seemed to fade. He was a surprisingly good dancer, moving with the same confidence he brought to everything else. "Where did a Texas cowboy learn to waltz?" Evelyn asked. "My sister Rachel insisted, said no brother of hers was going to be a clumsy oaf at social gatherings." His expression softened at the memory. "She'd stand on my feet and make me practice until I got it right. I must have been about 12, and I thought it was the most useless skill in the world." He smiled. "Now I'm grateful." They danced 3 dances in a row, oblivious to the whispers, lost in their own world. When they finally stepped off the floor, Evelyn's cheeks were flushed and her heart was racing, not from exertion, but from the feel of Colt's hand in hers, his eyes never leaving her face, his presence solid and real and hers. The evening was going better than Evelyn had dared hope until the incident that would change everything. She had gone outside for a breath of air, the church having grown warm and stuffy with so many bodies. The night was crystal clear, stars brilliant in the black sky, her breath forming white clouds. She stood on the church steps, wrapped in her shawls, thinking about how much her life had changed in 3 short months. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear the men approaching until one of them spoke. "Well, well, the Baron's schoolteacher, all alone." Evelyn's blood went cold. She turned to find 3 figures emerging from the shadows, the same 3 drifters who had accosted her after the harvest fair. The same ones Colt had run off. They were drunker this time, meaner, their faces twisted with something ugly. "Gentlemen, I suggest you go back to wherever you came from," Evelyn said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mr. Danner is inside, and he won't be pleased to find you bothering me again." "That's the thing," the tall one slurred. "We don't care about your cowboy anymore. We're leaving town tonight, heading south before the real cold sets in, but we figured we had some unfinished business with you first." They spread out, blocking her path back to the church door. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. She opened her mouth to scream. The church door burst open, and Colt stepped out, his expression going from confused to furious in an instant when he saw the scene before him. He moved with frightening speed, placing himself between Evelyn and the 3 men, his hand dropping to where his pistol would normally hang, except he'd left it at home, this being a church social. "Last time I saw you boys, I told you to leave the lady alone," Colt said, his voice deadly quiet. "Appears you've got a hearing problem." "We ain't afraid of you, cowboy," the tall one said, but his voice wavered. "There's 3 of us and 1 of you, and you ain't even armed." "Don't need a gun to handle drunk trash," Colt replied. "But you're right about one thing. There are 3 of you, which means when I start breaking bones, you'll have to figure out who carries who back to whatever hole you crawled out of." Behind them, the church door opened again. Tom Jenkins emerged, followed by Samuel Crawford and 3 other ranchers who'd attended Colt's gathering. They took in the situation instantly and moved to flank Colt, creating a wall of solid, sober men between Evelyn and her would-be attackers. "Problem here, Danner?" Tom asked mildly, but his hand rested on his own pistol. "Just some boys who don't understand the word no," Colt replied. "They were just leaving." The three drifters looked at the men facing them, outnumbered, outmatched, and out of luck. The fight went out of them like air from a punctured balloon. They backed away, muttering curses, and stumbled off into the darkness. Colt turned immediately to Evelyn, his hands coming up to frame her face. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "No, I'm fine. They just startled me." Evelyn was shaking now, the delayed fear hitting her. "Thank you. If you hadn't come out—" "Don't think about it." Colt pulled her close, and she buried her face in his chest, feeling his heart racing as fast as hers. "You're safe. That's all that matters." Tom Jenkins cleared his throat. "We should report this to the sheriff." "Agreed." Colt kept one arm around Evelyn. "But first, I'm taking Evelyn home. She's had enough excitement for one night." The ride back to Evelyn's cottage was quiet, both of them still shaken. Colt insisted on checking every room, every window, making sure she was secure before he'd even consider leaving. When he was finally satisfied, he stood in her kitchen, hat in hands, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I can't do this anymore," he said quietly. Evelyn felt her heart drop. "What?" "I can't keep courting you properly and respectably and waiting for the right time." He crossed to her in 2 strides, taking her hands in his. "Tonight, when I saw those men threatening you, all I could think was that if something happened to you, if I lost you before I'd told you everything in my heart, I'd never forgive myself." "Colt, let me finish, please." He took a shaky breath. "I love you, Evelyn. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you care for your students. I love your smile and your stubborn determination and the way you make terrible coffee. I love that you challenge me to be better, to read better, to think deeper. I love you exactly as you are, and I don't care what you can or can't give me because you've already given me more than I ever hoped for. You've given me purpose and joy and a reason to build a future." Tears were streaming down Evelyn's face now. "I love you too. God help me. I love you so much it terrifies me." "Then marry me." The words came out raw, desperate. "Not someday. Not when the time is right. Now. Marry me this Christmas, and let's start our life together. I'm tired of waiting, tired of worrying about what people think, tired of courting you from a careful distance when all I want is to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life." "Christmas is 4 days away," Evelyn said weakly. "I know. Is that enough time to plan a wedding?" Evelyn looked at him, at his sky-blue eyes blazing with emotion, at his strong hands holding hers, at the future written in every line of his face. She thought about all the reasons to say no, all the logical arguments against rushing into marriage, and then she thought about those men in the darkness, about how quickly everything could change, about how precious and fleeting happiness could be. "Yes," she said, "yes, I'll marry you. This Christmas, 4 days from now, in front of God and everyone. Yes." Colt let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and kissed her with an intensity that made her dizzy. When they finally broke apart, both were crying and laughing at the same time. "I should go," Colt said reluctantly. "It's late, and we need to maintain some propriety for 4 more days." "4 more days," Evelyn echoed, the words feeling both impossibly long and thrillingly short. After he left, Evelyn sat in her quiet cottage, her fingers touching her lips where he'd kissed her, her heart so full it ached. She'd gone from broken to beloved in 3 months, from convinced her life was over to planning a wedding. It felt like a dream, fragile and unbelievable. But when she finally went to bed, she clutched the leather-bound Jane Eyre to her chest and let herself believe in happy endings. The next 4 days passed in a blur of activity. Sarah took charge of wedding preparations with the enthusiasm of a general marshalling troops. Evelyn's dress, the burgundy silk she'd worn to the social, was hastily altered to be more appropriate for a wedding. Reverend Thomas agreed to perform the ceremony on Christmas Eve, saying he could think of no better way to celebrate the birth of Christ than by blessing the union of 2 people so clearly in love. The guest list was kept small, intimate. Tom and Martha Jenkins, Samuel and Ruth Crawford, the other ranchers from Colt's gathering, Sarah and her husband, of course, Mrs. Henderson, who cried when Evelyn invited her and immediately began planning what food she'd bring to the reception, even some of Evelyn's students and their more open-minded parents, Notably absent from the invitation list were Mrs. Patterson and the other town gossips who had made Evelyn's life miserable. It was a small act of defiance, a statement that their new life would be built on their own terms, surrounded by people who supported them. On Christmas Eve morning, Evelyn woke to find the world covered in fresh snow, everything pristine and white and perfect. Sarah arrived early to help her dress, chattering nervously about hair and flowers and whether the church would be warm enough. "Are you scared?" Sarah asked as she fastened the final button on Evelyn's dress. "Terrified," Evelyn admitted. "But not of marrying Colt. I'm scared that it's all too good to be true, that something will go wrong, that I'll wake up and discover it was all a dream." "It's real," Sarah said firmly, "and you deserve this happiness, Evelyn. Stop waiting for the other shoe to drop and just enjoy it." The church was indeed warm when they arrived, candles glowing softly, pine boughs scenting the air. The small group of guests sat in the front pews, their faces friendly and welcoming. And at the altar, looking nervous and handsome in his dark suit, stood Colt Danner. When he saw Evelyn walking down the aisle toward him, his face transformed. The nervousness vanished, replaced by a smile so full of joy and love that Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. By the time she reached him, she was crying openly, and so was he. Reverend Thomas smiled at them both. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the joining of two souls who have found in each other a love that transcends society's expectations and medical diagnoses, a love built on respect and admiration and genuine affection. This is a marriage blessed not because it meets conventional standards, but because it honors the most important standard of all, the commitment of two people to build a life together, come what may." The ceremony was simple but beautiful. Colt's voice shook when he said his vows, promising to love and cherish Evelyn in sickness and in health, in plenty and in want, until death parted them. Evelyn's voice was steadier, surprising herself, as she promised the same, to stand by him, to build a life with him, to love him with everything she had. When Reverend Thomas finally said, "You may kiss your bride," Colt cradled Evelyn's face in his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that made several guests sigh audibly. And when they turned to face their friends as husband and wife, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in months, complete, unqualified joy. The reception at the church hall was modest but joyful. There was food and music and dancing, and for once, Evelyn didn't care who was watching or what they might say. She danced with her husband, and laughed with friends and felt, for the first time since that terrible day in Dr. Hutchinson's office, like her life had meaning and purpose and a future worth living. As the evening wore down and guests began to depart, Tom Jenkins pulled Colt aside one final time. "You've got yourself a good woman, Danner. Build that life you talked about. Make it count." "I intend to," Colt replied, his eyes finding Evelyn across the room. "Every single day." When the last guest had gone and they stood alone in the churchyard under a sky brilliant with stars, Evelyn turned to her husband. "Take me home," she said softly, "to our home." Colt lifted her into the wagon he'd driven into town, tucking blankets around her against the cold, and they rode out toward the ranch in companionable silence. The snow glittered in the moonlight, and the future stretched before them, unknown and uncertain and theirs. When they finally reached the ranch house, Colt carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing at the old tradition. Inside, a fire was already burning. Tom must have come out earlier to prepare it, and the house was warm and welcoming. "Welcome home, Mrs. Danner," Colt said, setting her down gently. "Home," Evelyn repeated, testing the word. It felt right, perfect, complete. Yes, home. And as they stood together in the house they would share, in the life they were building together, in the love that had survived gossip and judgment and every obstacle thrown in their path, Evelyn finally allowed herself to believe that happy endings were real and that hers was just beginning. The first months of marriage unfolded like a dream Evelyn was afraid to wake from. She moved into the ranch house, bringing her books and her yellow curtains and her modest possessions, transforming the sparse bachelor quarters into a real home. Colt built her shelves for her growing library, crafted a window seat where she could read on sunny afternoons, cleared space in the barn for the mare he'd bought her as a wedding gift, a gentle chestnut named Juniper with a white star on her forehead. They fell into rhythms that felt both new and ancient. Evelyn continued teaching, riding into town 3 days a week while Colt worked the ranch. On the days she was home, she helped with the endless work, mending fences, tending the kitchen garden she'd planted despite the lingering snow, learning to cook meals hearty enough for a man who worked from dawn to dusk. Colt continued his reading lessons, progressing from primers to newspapers to actual novels, his confidence growing with each passing week. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, Colt reading aloud while Evelyn mended or knitted, both of them stealing glances at each other like teenagers with a secret. At night, they shared the bed Colt had built himself, and Evelyn discovered that intimacy could be tender and passionate and healing all at once, that being loved completely could begin to repair the broken places inside her. But the shadow of her infertility never fully lifted. It lingered at the edges of their happiness, a quiet ache that surfaced in unexpected moments. When Martha Jenkins visited and mentioned her daughter's new baby, Evelyn felt the familiar twist in her stomach. When they attended church and she watched young mothers shepherding their children, she wondered if Colt noticed, if he felt the absence as keenly as she did. She never asked. Some questions were too dangerous to voice. Spring arrived in late March, melting the snow and turning the ranch into a sea of mud. Evelyn threw herself into her garden with almost desperate energy, planting vegetables and herbs and flowers, creating life from soil and seed in a way her body never could. Colt watched her with gentle concern, but said nothing, simply helped her build raised beds and haul compost and string fences to keep the deer out. One evening in April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, Colt finally broached the subject that had been hovering between them. "You've been quiet lately," he said, his arm around her shoulders. "More than usual. Something on your mind?" Evelyn was silent for a long moment, trying to find words for feelings she barely understood herself. "I'm happy," she said finally. "Happier than I ever thought I'd be. But sometimes I look around at what we're building, and I wonder what it's all for. What happens to this ranch when we're gone? Who inherits all this work we're putting in?" "We could adopt," Colt said quietly. "There are orphanages in Denver, children who need homes. We could give them a life here, a family." The suggestion should have filled Evelyn with hope, but instead she felt a complicated tangle of emotions she couldn't unravel. "Would that be enough for you? Raising someone else's children instead of your own?" Colt turned her to face him, his blue eyes serious. "Evelyn, I need you to hear this, really hear it. I didn't marry you hoping for children or planning to work around your condition. I married you because I love you, exactly as you are. If we adopt someday, wonderful. If we don't, that's fine too. This ranch will go to whoever we choose to leave it to, or we'll sell it and donate the money to build a school. I don't care about legacy the way you think I do. But your family ranch in Texas, 3 generations, and I sold it," Colt interrupted gently, "because land and legacy aren't what matter. People matter. You matter. The life we build together matters, not what happens to it after we're dust." Evelyn felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "I want to believe that." "Then believe it." He kissed her forehead. "We're enough, Evelyn. Just you and me. We're enough." That conversation should have settled her anxiety, but instead it seemed to crack something open inside her. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn found herself crying at odd moments, while collecting eggs, while grating papers, while stirring soup that suddenly seemed too bright and too hot. She felt exhausted all the time, her body heavy and strange, her emotions swinging wildly between contentment and inexplicable sadness. Sarah noticed during one of their weekly visits in early May. They were sitting in Evelyn's kitchen, supposedly planning the end-of-year school program, but Evelyn kept losing her train of thought, staring out the window at nothing. "Evelyn," Sarah said carefully, "are you feeling all right? You look pale." "Just tired," Evelyn said automatically. "The end of the school year is always exhausting." "It's more than that. You've been tired for weeks." Sarah hesitated. "Have you been eating properly? Sleeping?" "Not really hungry lately," Evelyn admitted, "and I keep waking up feeling sick. It's probably just stress." Sarah's eyes widened. "Evelyn, when was your last monthly?" "I don't know. I haven't been keeping track." Evelyn stopped, her own eyes going wide as the implication hit her. No, that's impossible. Dr. Hutchinson said, Dr. Hutchinson said it was unlikely, not impossible, Sarah said urgently. Evelyn, you need to see him, today. I can't be pregnant. Evelyn's voice shook. I can't. It would be cruel to hope for something that isn't real. But Sarah was already gathering her things, determination written across her face. We're going to town right now, even if it's just to rule it out. You need to know. The ride into Silver Creek felt endless. Evelyn's mind spun in circles, cataloging symptoms that could mean anything or nothing. The exhaustion, the nausea, the strange heaviness in her breasts. They could be explained by stress or illness or a dozen other things. To hope for pregnancy would be to set herself up for devastating disappointment. Dr. Hutchinson's office looked exactly as it had that terrible September day 7 months ago. The same worn chairs, the same antiseptic smell, the same stern portrait of some medical pioneer staring down from the wall. Evelyn's hand shook as she took a seat. The doctor emerged from his examination room, his eyebrows rising when he saw her. Mrs. Danner, this is unexpected. What brings you in? I need an examination, Evelyn said, her voice steadier than she felt. I've been feeling unwell, and Sarah we thought. She couldn't finish the sentence. Dr. Hutchinson's expression shifted from surprise to something more complex. Come with me then. Let's see what's going on. The examination felt both identical to and completely different from the one 7 months ago. The same clinical touches, the same embarrassing vulnerability, but this time with a thread of desperate hope running through Evelyn's fear. When Dr. Hutchinson finally stepped back, his face was unreadable. Get dressed, Mrs. Danner. I'll speak with you in a moment. Those moments stretched into an eternity. Evelyn dressed with trembling hands, her mind simultaneously racing and blank. When she emerged, Dr. Hutchinson was seated at his desk, writing something in his ledger. He looked up, removed his spectacles, and studied her for a long moment. Mrs. Danner, he began slowly, when I examined you last September, I told you that pregnancy was virtually impossible. I based that assessment on 30 years of medical practice and what I believe to be a thorough understanding of your condition. Evelyn's heart was beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. However, Dr. Hutchinson continued, and something that might have been wonder crept into his voice. It appears that I was wrong. You are approximately 3 months pregnant. The room tilted. Evelyn gripped the arms of her chair, certain she'd misheard. What? You're with child, Mrs. Danner. I can feel the enlargement of your uterus, and your symptoms align perfectly with early pregnancy. He shook his head slowly. In 30 years, I've never been so happy to be proven wrong. I don't know how this happened, whether my initial diagnosis was mistaken or whether this is simply a medical miracle. But the fact remains, you're going to have a baby. But you said I couldn't. I know what I said. Dr. Hutchinson's voice was gruff, but not unkind. And I believed it to be true. The malformation I observed should have made conception and implantation nearly impossible. Yet here we are. Sometimes, Mrs. Danner, medicine doesn't have all the answers. Evelyn pressed her hands to her stomach, feeling nothing different yet, knowing everything had changed. Is the baby... Will it be all right? Can I carry it safely? The doctor's expression grew more serious. I won't lie to you. The same condition that should have prevented pregnancy could cause complications. You'll need to be careful. No heavy lifting, plenty of rest, immediate medical attention at any sign of bleeding or pain. The next 6 months will require caution and, frankly, a great deal of luck. But at this moment, you are pregnant with what appears to be a healthy fetus. I'm going to have a baby, Evelyn whispered, and suddenly she was crying, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. I'm going to have Colt's baby. Dr. Hutchinson handed her a handkerchief, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Yes, you are. Now go tell that husband of yours before you faint from the shock. And Mrs. Danner, I'm truly happy for you both. Sarah was waiting in the outer room, jumping up the moment Evelyn emerged. One look at her friend's tear-stained, radiant face told her everything. Oh my God, Sarah breathed. Oh my God, Evelyn. They held each other in the doctor's waiting room, both crying and laughing, drawing curious stares from the other patients. Evelyn felt untethered from reality, like she might float away if Sarah wasn't anchoring her. "I need to tell Colt," Evelyn said when she could finally speak. "I need to go home right now and tell him." The ride back to the ranch was a blur. Evelyn pushed Juniper harder than she should have, then felt guilty and slowed down, remembering Dr. Hutchinson's warnings about caution. By the time she reached the ranch, the sun was setting and Colt was in the barn, tending to the horses after a day's work. He looked up when she burst in, his smile of greeting fading when he saw her expression. "Evelyn? What's wrong? Are you hurt? I need to tell you something." Evelyn dismounted clumsily, her legs shaking. "I saw Dr. Hutchinson today." Colt's face went pale. "Are you sick? Is it serious?" "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them. Colt stared at her, uncomprehending, as if she'd spoken in a foreign language. "You're what?" "Pregnant. With child. I'm going to have a baby." Evelyn's voice broke. "Our baby, Colt. The doctor said it shouldn't be possible, but it is. I'm 3 months along." For a heartbeat, Colt didn't move. Then he dropped the brush he'd been holding and closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands coming up to cup her face. "Say it again," he demanded, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." Colt sank to his knees in the hay-strewn barn floor, his arms wrapping around Evelyn's waist, his face pressed against her stomach. His shoulders shook with sobs, great wrenching sounds that seemed torn from somewhere deep inside him. "Our baby?" he managed between sobs. "We're really going to have a baby?" "Yes." Evelyn ran her fingers through his hair, her own tears falling into the dark strands. "I know it's shocking. I'm still trying to believe it myself, but Dr. Hutchinson confirmed it. There's a baby, Colt. Our baby." He looked up at her, his face wet with tears, his blue eyes blazing with joy and wonder and something like awe. "I don't understand how this is possible. He said you couldn't—" "I know. He doesn't understand it either. He called it a miracle." Evelyn laughed shakily. "I'm terrified, Colt. Terrified something will go wrong, that I'll lose it, that this hope will be taken away. But for right now, in this moment, there's a baby growing inside me. Our baby." Colt rose to his feet, pulling her close, his hand spreading protectively over her still flat stomach. "A miracle," he repeated softly. "Our miracle." Then his expression shifted to concern. "Is it safe? Are you both all right? What did the doctor say?" "He said I need to be careful, that there could be complications because of my condition. But right now, everything is fine." Evelyn covered his hand with hers. "We have to be cautious, but Colt, we're going to have a baby." They stood like that in the dimming barn, holding each other, Colt's hand pressed to where their child was growing, both of them crying and laughing in equal measure. The horses shifted in their stalls, curious about the commotion, and somewhere outside an owl called its evening song, and the impossible had become real. That night, Colt refused to let Evelyn do anything that might be remotely strenuous. He cooked dinner, badly, burning the biscuits and oversalting the beans, and insisted she rest on the settee with her feet up. He brought her extra pillows, worried aloud about whether she was warm enough, cold enough, comfortable enough. "Colt," Evelyn finally said, laughing despite her exhaustion. "I'm pregnant, not dying. I can still function." "I know, He ran a hand through his hair, looking adorably flustered. "I don't want anything to happen. After everything we've been through, after being told this was impossible, I'm terrified of losing it." "I am too," Evelyn admitted. "Every moment. But we can't live in fear for the next 6 months. We have to trust that if this baby has fought this hard to exist, it's not going anywhere." Colt sat beside her, pulling her into his arms. "When should we tell people?" "Not yet. Dr. Hutchinson said the first few months are the riskiest. Let's wait until we're sure everything is stable." Evelyn rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Besides, I want to keep this secret a little longer. Just you and me and our miracle." "Our miracle," Colt repeated, the words like a prayer. "God, Evelyn, I can't believe this is real." "Neither can I." The next weeks were a delicate balance of joy and anxiety. Evelyn continued teaching but found herself tiring more easily, needing afternoon naps that left her groggy but refreshed. Her stomach began to show the faintest swell, barely noticeable under her loose dresses but unmistakable to her own touch. Colt became even more protective, hovering and worrying, driving Evelyn to exasperation even as she loved him for it. Sarah kept the secret faithfully, though she could barely contain her excitement. She brought Evelyn books on pregnancy and childbirth, shared her own experiences, helped her begin planning for a nursery in the small room off the main bedroom. In mid-June, Evelyn woke in the middle of the night to sharp cramping in her abdomen. She lay still, terror washing over her in cold waves, afraid to move, afraid to wake Colt, afraid that the miracle was ending. But after a few minutes, the cramping eased, and when she cautiously checked, there was no bleeding. Just her body adjusting, she told herself. Just normal pregnancy discomfort. But the scare made her realize she couldn't keep teaching. The daily ride into town, the physical demands of managing a classroom of energetic children, it was too risky. With Colt's full support, she resigned her position at the end of the school year, her letter to the school board citing only personal circumstances without elaboration. The gossips, of course, had a field day speculating about why the newlywed teacher was suddenly leaving her position. Some whispered scandal, others suggested marital trouble. Let them talk, Evelyn thought. Soon enough, they'd know the truth. She chose to reveal her pregnancy in July, when she was nearly 5 months along and the swell of her belly could no longer be concealed. They told Colt's closest friends first, Tom and Martha Jenkins, who reacted with stunned delight and immediate concern. Martha hugged Evelyn so tightly that Colt had to gently remind her to be careful. "A baby," Martha kept saying, shaking her head. "After what that doctor told you, it's a genuine miracle." Word spread through the ranching community rapidly, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. But telling the town proper, that was different. The Sunday Evelyn and Colt walked into church with her pregnancy obvious, the whispers exploded like wildfire. She could feel eyes on her swollen belly, heard the shocked murmurs, saw Mrs. Patterson's face go through a fascinating series of expressions. Surprise, disbelief, suspicion, and finally, sour disappointment that her predictions of Evelyn's barrenness had been proven wrong. After the service, as Evelyn and Colt made their way to their wagon, Mrs. Patterson intercepted them. "Mrs. Danner," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "how wonderful that you're expecting, though one does wonder, given Dr. Hutchinson's very clear diagnosis, whether there might have been some misunderstanding about your condition." The implication was clear and vicious, that Evelyn had lied about being infertile to trap Colt into marriage, or worse, that the child wasn't his. Before Evelyn could respond, Colt stepped forward, his voice dangerously quiet. "Ma'am, I'm going to say this once and only once. My wife's medical history is none of your concern. This baby is mine, is a gift we never expected, and if I hear you or anyone else suggesting otherwise, we'll be having a very different conversation. Are we clear?" Mrs. Patterson's face reddened, but she had the sense to back down. "Of course, Mr. Danner, I meant no offense." "See that you don't." Colt helped Evelyn into the wagon, his jaw tight with anger. As they drove away, Evelyn took his hand. "Thank you for defending me. Again." "Always," Colt said firmly. "I'll always defend you. And our baby." But despite Colt's defense, the damage was done. The gossip mills churned with new speculation, that Evelyn had fabricated her infertility, that she'd trapped Colt, that the pregnancy itself was somehow scandalous. Even some of the people who'd supported their marriage now looked at Evelyn with suspicion. It hurt, but Evelyn tried to focus on the positive. Dr. Hutchinson, when she went for her monthly examinations, expressed cautious optimism. The baby seemed healthy, growing well, moving regularly. Her condition, whatever it was, didn't seem to be affecting the pregnancy negatively. "I still don't understand it medically," the doctor admitted during her July visit. "By all logic, this shouldn't have happened. But nature has a way of defying our understanding. Just continue being careful." As summer deepened into August, Evelyn's body transformed in ways that amazed and sometimes frightened her. Her belly swelled round and firm, the baby's movements becoming strong enough that Colt could feel them too. His face the first time he felt the baby kick was something Evelyn would treasure forever. wonder and joy and tears all mingled together. "That's our baby," he'd whispered, his hand spread across her stomach. "Our actual baby, moving inside you." They spent hours talking to her belly, Colt reading aloud from the novels he'd finally mastered, Evelyn singing the lullabies her own mother had sung to her. They transformed the small room into a nursery, painting walls and building a cradle, arguing cheerfully over names. "If it's a boy, we could name him after my father," Colt suggested one evening as they worked on the cradle together, or rather as Colt worked and Evelyn supervised from a comfortable chair. "What was his name?" "James. James Robert Danner." "James Danner," Evelyn tested. "I like it. Strong but gentle. What if it's a girl?" Colt was quiet for a moment. "I'd like to name her Hope, because that's what she is. Hope when we thought there was none." Evelyn felt tears spring to her eyes, as they did so easily these days. "Hope Rachel Danner, after your sister too." "Perfect," Colt said softly. "Absolutely perfect." But as the pregnancy advanced, so did Evelyn's anxiety. She was in uncharted territory. A woman told she could never conceive, now carrying a baby that medical science said shouldn't exist. What if something went wrong at the last moment? What if her body, which had defied all odds to conceive, couldn't handle the delivery? The fears came to a head one night in late August when Evelyn woke from a nightmare, gasping and clutching her swollen belly. In the dream, she'd been in labor, but the baby wouldn't come, and Dr. Hutchinson kept saying it was impossible, that the baby couldn't exist, and she'd woken with tears streaming down her face. Colt held her, rocking her gently, murmuring reassurances. "It was just a dream, just a bad dream. You're both fine. I can feel the baby kicking right now. Feel?" He pressed her hand to her stomach, and sure enough, there was a firm thump against her palm. Their baby, very much alive, very much real. "I'm so scared," Evelyn admitted. "Scared that after everything, something will still go wrong. That I won't be able to deliver safely. That I'll lose the baby, or—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Then we'll face it together," Colt said firmly. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together. But Evelyn, you're the strongest woman I know. You've survived gossip and prejudice and heartbreak. You'll survive this too." "How can you be so sure?" "Because you have to," Colt said simply. "Because that baby needs you, and because I need you. So you're going to get through this, and in a few weeks we're going to be holding our miracle baby, and all this fear will just be a memory." Evelyn wanted to believe him, needed to believe him, so she nodded against his chest and let him hold her until sleep claimed her again, dreamless this time, peaceful. September arrived with cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn color on the distant mountains. Evelyn was enormous now, moving slowly, her back aching constantly, her ankles swollen. Dr. Hutchinson examined her weekly now, his expression a mixture of professional concern and genuine fascination. "Any day now," he said during her first September visit. "The baby's positioned correctly. Everything looks as good as can be expected. When labor starts, send for me immediately. Given your condition, I want to be there from the beginning." That night, Colt insisted they stay close to the house. He'd already arranged for Tom Jenkins to be on call, ready to ride for the doctor the moment labor began. Everything was prepared: clean linens, boiled water, the cradle waiting in the nursery, tiny clothes that Sarah had helped sew. All they could do was wait. The contractions started on a Tuesday morning, subtle at first, just a tightening across her belly that Evelyn almost dismissed as the false labor she'd experienced before. But these didn't stop. They came in waves, growing gradually stronger, more regular. By noon, Evelyn was certain. "Colt," she called from the bedroom where she'd been resting. "I think it's time." She'd never seen him move so fast. Within minutes, Tom was racing toward town for Dr. Hutchinson, and Colt was helping Evelyn through the increasingly intense contractions, his face pale but determined. "You're doing great," he kept saying, even as she gripped his hand hard enough to bruise. "Just breathe through it. Dr. Hutchinson will be here soon." But the doctor seemed to take forever to arrive, and by the time his buggy finally rattled into the yard, Evelyn was in agony, the contractions coming hard and fast, her body demanding to push even as she knew it was too soon. Dr. Hutchinson examined her quickly, his expression grave. The baby's coming fast. Too fast. Mrs. Danner, I need you to listen to me very carefully and do exactly as I say." The next hours were a blur of pain and effort and fear. Colt stayed by her side the entire time, letting her crush his hand, wiping her forehead, murmuring encouragement, even as his own face reflected her terror. Dr. Hutchinson worked with grim efficiency, his instructions clipped and urgent. "Push now. Stop. Breathe. Again." Evelyn had never known such pain existed. Her body was tearing itself apart, and she was certain she was dying, certain the baby was dying, certain this was God's punishment for daring to hope for the impossible. "I can't," she sobbed at one point. "I can't do this anymore." "Yes, you can," Colt said fiercely, his face close to hers. "You're almost there, Evelyn. Our baby's almost here. Just a little more. Please, love. Just a little more." And then, when she thought she had nothing left to give, when she was ready to surrender to the darkness creeping at the edges of her vision, Dr. Hutchinson said, "One more push. Give me one more push." Evelyn bore down with everything she had left, a scream tearing from her throat. And suddenly, miraculously, the pressure ceased. There was a moment of absolute silence, and then the most beautiful sound Evelyn had ever heard. A baby's cry, loud and indignant and unmistakably alive. "It's a girl," Dr. Hutchinson said, his voice thick with emotion. "Mrs. Danner, you have a daughter." Through her tears and exhaustion, Evelyn watched as the doctor quickly cleaned the baby and wrapped her in a blanket. Then he placed the squirming, crying bundle in her arms, and Evelyn looked down at the tiny red face, the shock of dark hair, the perfect miniature fingers, and felt her heart crack open with a love so fierce it was almost painful. "Hope," she whispered. "Hope Rachel Danner." Beside her, Colt was sobbing openly, his hand trembling as he reached out to touch his daughter's tiny fist. Hope immediately grasped his finger with surprising strength, and Colt made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "She's perfect," he managed. "Evelyn, she's absolutely perfect." 10 fingers, 10 toes, strong lungs, and a fighting spirit, Dr. Hutchinson said, his own eyes suspiciously bright as he worked to deliver the afterbirth. "Mrs. Danner, you've just accomplished something I would have sworn was medically impossible. I don't know how to explain what I've witnessed here today, except to call it exactly what you said it was. A miracle." As he continued his work, making sure Evelyn was recovering properly, checking for complications, Evelyn couldn't take her eyes off her daughter. Hope had stopped crying and was looking around with unfocused eyes, her tiny mouth working as if already searching for food. "She's hungry," Evelyn said wonderingly. "Then feed her," Dr. Hutchinson said with a smile. "Welcome to motherhood, Mrs. Danner." With Sarah's help, she'd arrived shortly after the birth, summoned by Tom. Evelyn managed to nurse Hope for the first time. The sensation was strange and wonderful and slightly painful, and when Hope latched on and began to feed with determined vigor, Evelyn felt tears streaming down her face again. "I'm a mother," she whispered to Colt, who sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, his eyes never leaving his daughter. "I'm actually a mother." "You're an amazing mother," Colt corrected, kissing her temple. "You brought our miracle into the world. You fought for her every step of the way. And now she's here, and she's perfect, and we're a family." A family. The word that had once meant only pain and loss and impossibility now meant this: a tiny baby nursing at her breast, a husband holding them both with infinite gentleness, a home filled with love and hope and the promise of tomorrow. As evening fell and Dr. Hutchinson finally packed his instruments and prepared to leave, he paused at the bedroom door. "Mrs. Danner," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. When I told you that you would never bear children, I spoke with certainty born of medical training and experience. But I failed to account for the one thing that no amount of medical knowledge can predict: the resilience of the human spirit and the mystery of creation itself. You've taught this old doctor a valuable lesson about humility." "You were doing your best with the knowledge you had," Evelyn said graciously. "And when it mattered most, you were here to help bring hope safely into the world. I'm grateful for that." After he left, after Sarah had tidied up and promised to return in the morning, after the lamps were dimmed and the house was quiet, except for Hope's soft breathing from her cradle beside the bed, Colt pulled Evelyn close. "How are you feeling?" he asked softly. "Exhausted. Sore. Like I've been trampled by a herd of cattle." Evelyn smiled. "And happier than I ever thought possible." "Me too." Colt looked over at the cradle where Hope slept, swaddled and peaceful. "When I saw those men threatening you that night after the harvest fair, I thought that was the most scared I'd ever be. Then when you told me you were pregnant, I thought that was the most scared I'd ever be. But today, listening to you in labor, watching you fight to bring our baby into the world, that was true terror." "But we made it through," Evelyn said. "All three of us." "All three of us," Colt echoed. "Our family." They lay together in the darkness, listening to their daughter breathe, and Evelyn thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that terrible day in Dr. Hutchinson's office to this moment, from broken to beloved, from barren to mother, from despair to hope, it felt like a lifetime had passed. In some ways, it had. The woman she'd been then, afraid and alone and convinced her life was over, that woman was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who'd learned that medical diagnoses weren't destiny, that love could rewrite the future, that impossible things happened when you were brave enough to hope for them. In the cradle, Hope stirred and made a small sound, not quite a cry. Evelyn started to rise, but Colt was faster, lifting their daughter with careful gentleness and bringing her to Evelyn. "I think someone's hungry again," he said, settling Hope into her mother's arms. As Evelyn nursed her daughter in the quiet darkness, Colt's hand resting protectively on her shoulder, she finally allowed herself to believe that this was real, that this happiness wouldn't be snatched away, that the whispers about her being barren and useless had been replaced by the soft sounds of a baby's contented feeding. They were a family now. Against all odds, despite every diagnosis and prediction, they were a family. And nothing, not gossip or prejudice or medical impossibility, could take that away from them. The first weeks of Hope's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Evelyn discovered that motherhood was simultaneously the most exhausting and most fulfilling thing she'd ever experienced. Hope was a demanding baby, waking every few hours to nurse, crying with impressive volume when she was hungry or uncomfortable, but also capable of moments of such perfect peace that Evelyn would sit for hours just watching her sleep. Colt was a devoted father from the start, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floors with Hope when she was fussy, singing off-key lullabies that somehow always soothed her. He'd built a rocking chair and placed it by the bedroom window, and Evelyn spent countless hours there, nursing Hope, while watching the autumn colors deepen across the valley. The town's reaction to Hope's birth was mixed, as Evelyn had expected. Some people genuinely celebrated the miracle. Mrs. Henderson brought over a beautiful quilt she'd sewn, Sarah organized a parade of well-wishers bearing casseroles and baby clothes, and even Reverend Thomas came to offer his blessing, calling Hope a testament to God's mysterious grace. But others, particularly Mrs. Patterson and her circle, remained skeptical and unkind. The whispers persisted, that Evelyn had lied about her infertility, that she'd trapped Colt into marriage, even absurd suggestions that the baby wasn't his. Colt wanted to confront them directly, but Evelyn stopped him. "Let them talk," she said one evening as she nursed Hope in the rocking chair. "We know the truth. Dr. Hutchinson knows the truth. The people who matter believe us. The rest? They're just bitter people looking for reasons to be cruel." "It's not right," Colt muttered, pacing the bedroom. "You shouldn't have to endure their poison." "I've endured worse." Evelyn looked down at Hope, who was nursing contentedly, her tiny hand resting against Evelyn's breast. "And I have everything I need right here. Their opinion doesn't matter anymore." But even as she spoke those words, Evelyn knew they weren't entirely true. The whispers still stung, still made her question herself in quiet moments. Had she somehow fabricated her infertility for attention? Had Dr. Hutchinson been mistaken from the start? The logical part of her brain knew these doubts were ridiculous. She'd been examined thoroughly. The diagnosis had been clear and devastating. Yet the gossip's cruel insinuations had a way of burrowing under her skin. The issue came to a head in late October when Evelyn took Hope into town for the first time since the birth. She needed supplies and was tired of being cooped up at the ranch, no matter how much she loved it. Sarah had encouraged her, saying it was time to show the town that Evelyn Danner had nothing to hide or be ashamed of. The moment Evelyn walked into the general store with Hope bundled in her arms, she felt the familiar prickle of attention. Mrs. Henderson greeted her warmly, cooing over the baby, but several other women in the store fell silent, their eyes hard and judgmental. Evelyn was gathering her purchases when she overheard Mrs. Patterson's voice from the next aisle, pitched just loud enough to be clearly audible. "I'm just saying it's suspicious, that's all. A woman claims to be barren, marries a wealthy rancher in unseemly haste, and suddenly she's pregnant? Any sensible person would have questions." Another woman's voice, one Evelyn didn't recognize, responded, "But the doctor confirmed her condition originally. Surely he wouldn't have been mistaken about something so serious." "Doctors can be fooled," Mrs. Patterson said darkly, "especially by a clever woman who knows how to manipulate a situation. Mark my words, there's more to this story than we're being told." Evelyn felt her face burn with shame and anger. Hope, sensing her mother's distress, began to fuss, her small whimpers quickly escalating to full cries. Evelyn tried to soothe her, but her hands were shaking, her vision blurring with tears. "That's quite enough, Eleanor." The new voice was stern and authoritative. Evelyn peered around the shelf to see Dr. Hutchinson standing in the store entrance, his medical bag in hand, his expression thunderous. "Dr. Hutchinson," Mrs. Patterson said, her face paling slightly, "I was simply discussing—" "You were spreading malicious lies about my patient," the doctor interrupted coldly, "and I will not stand here and allow you to continue." He moved into the store, his presence commanding immediate attention. Every person present fell silent, watching the confrontation unfold. "I examined Evelyn Moore last September and diagnosed her with a congenital uterine malformation that made pregnancy virtually impossible," Dr. Hutchinson said, his voice carrying clearly through the store. "I use that word virtually because in medicine we learn never to say never, but I believed, based on 30 years of experience, that she would never conceive. I told her as much, and it broke her heart. I watched that diagnosis destroy her sense of self-worth and her hopes for the future." Mrs. Patterson opened her mouth to speak, but Dr. Hutchinson held up a hand. "I'm not finished. When Evelyn came to me 7 months ago suspecting pregnancy, I was skeptical. I examined her expecting to find some other explanation for her symptoms. But to my absolute astonishment, she was indeed pregnant. I have been monitoring her throughout this pregnancy, half expecting complications at every turn, unable to explain medically how this conception occurred. And yet 6 weeks ago, I delivered a healthy baby girl, a child that by all medical logic shouldn't exist." He paused, his eyes sweeping the crowd. "Now, you can choose to believe that this is some elaborate deception, that Evelyn somehow fooled me twice, once into believing she was infertile and once into believing she was pregnant. Or you can accept the simpler explanation, that sometimes, very rarely, medicine encounters something it cannot explain, something miraculous." "But," Mrs. Patterson tried again. "Mrs. Patterson, if you continue to spread these lies, I will be forced to discuss your medical history publicly as well. I'm sure your fellow townspeople would be fascinated to learn about the treatments you sought for your own fertility issues 20 years ago. Treatments that were, I might add, ultimately unsuccessful." The color drained from Mrs. Patterson's face. Around the store, several women looked away uncomfortably, and Evelyn realized with a shock that Mrs. Patterson's cruelty had been born from her own pain and failure. "I thought as much," Dr. Hutchinson said quietly. "Perhaps, Eleanor, you might consider that judging others harshly for their medical conditions is particularly hypocritical, coming from someone who struggled with similar issues." He turned to Evelyn, his expression softening. "Mrs. Danner, I apologize that you had to hear such ugliness. Please, let me walk you to your wagon." Evelyn, still stunned by the doctor's fierce defense, nodded mutely. As Dr. Hutchinson escorted her from the store, she heard Mrs. Henderson's voice ring out. "Eleanor Patterson, I've tolerated your mean-spirited gossip for years, but this is beyond the pale. You're no longer welcome in my establishment. Please leave." Outside, in the crisp autumn air, Evelyn finally found her voice. "Dr. Hutchinson, thank you. You didn't have to—" "Yes, I did." The doctor's face was stern. I failed you once by delivering a diagnosis that shattered your world. The least I can do is defend your reputation now. What Mrs. Patterson was insinuating is not just unkind, it's medically irresponsible and potentially slanderous. Hope had calmed in the fresh air and was now looking around with unfocused curiosity. Dr. Hutchinson smiled down at her. Besides, this little one is living proof that medicine doesn't have all the answers. She's special, Mrs. Danner. A genuine miracle baby. Don't let bitter women diminish that. After that day, something shifted in Silver Creek. Dr. Hutchinson's public defense of Evelyn, combined with Mrs. Henderson's banishment of Mrs. Patterson, seemed to turn the tide of public opinion. The whispers didn't stop entirely, but they became less pointed, less cruel. More people began stopping by the ranch to visit, to see the miracle baby, to offer congratulations that seemed genuine rather than suspicious. Even some of Mrs. Patterson's former allies distanced themselves from her, unwilling to be associated with someone who'd been publicly humiliated by the respected town doctor. Mrs. Patterson herself became increasingly isolated, her attempts at stirring up controversy falling on deaf ears. Winter arrived early again that year, and Evelyn found herself cherishing the enforced isolation. The ranch became their cocoon, their safe haven from the outside world. Hope grew rapidly, becoming more alert and responsive with each passing week. Her eyes, which had started unfocused and dark, began to lighten into a blue remarkably similar to Colt's. Her personality emerged. She was a happy baby, quick to smile, fascinated by everything around her. "She has your curiosity," Colt observed one evening, watching Hope track a dust mote floating in the lamplight with intense concentration. "Always studying things, trying to figure out how they work." "And your stubbornness," Evelyn replied with a laugh. "She knows exactly what she wants and isn't shy about demanding it." Christmas came and went in a blur of joy. It was Hope's first Christmas, and though she was too young to understand, Evelyn and Colt celebrated with fervor, decorating the house with pine boughs, roasting a goose, exchanging small gifts. Colt had carved a set of wooden blocks for Hope, each one carefully sanded smooth, and Evelyn had sewn her a warm winter coat from soft wool. On Christmas Eve, as they sat by the fire with Hope between them on the floor, exploring her new blocks with chubby fingers, Colt took Evelyn's hand. "A year ago today, we got married," he said softly. "Do you remember how scared we both were? How impossible all of this seemed?" "I remember thinking I didn't deserve to be so happy," Evelyn admitted. "That something would go wrong, that you'd realize you'd made a mistake." "And now?" Evelyn looked around their home, at the Christmas decorations, at their daughter happily gnawing on a wooden block, at her husband's face glowing in the firelight. "Now I think maybe I'm finally learning to accept that good things can last, that miracles don't have to be fragile." "Good," Colt said, kissing her hand, "because I have something to tell you." Evelyn's heart skipped. "What is it?" "Tom Jenkins approached me last week about buying some of his land, the parcel that borders our eastern fence. It would nearly double the size of our ranch." Colt's eyes were bright with excitement. "We could run more cattle, plant more crops, build something really substantial to pass on to Hope, and—" He paused, suddenly uncertain. "That is, if you'd want to consider—" "More children?" Evelyn finished softly. The thought had been hovering in her mind for weeks, but she'd been afraid to voice it. Afraid to seem greedy for wanting another miracle when one had already been granted. "I know it's probably impossible," Colt said quickly. "Dr. Hutchinson said Hope was a one-time miracle, but I can't help thinking that if it happened once, maybe it could happen again?" Evelyn smiled, feeling a familiar flutter of hope mixed with fear. "I've been thinking the same thing, but I'm also terrified. What if I can't? What if Hope really was our only miracle? What if hoping for more is selfish?" Colt pulled her close, careful not to disturb Hope, who had dozed off with the block still clutched in her hand. "Then hope is enough, more than enough. But if we're blessed with another child, I won't question it. I'll just be grateful." The conversation stayed with Evelyn through the winter months. She and Colt were careful not to prevent pregnancy, but also tried not to obsess over it. Months passed, January, February, March, and Evelyn told herself she was content with the family they had. Hope was thriving, becoming more active and vocal every day. By her first birthday in September, she was crawling everywhere, pulling herself up on furniture, babbling in a language only she understood. Then, in early October, Evelyn woke with familiar nausea. At first, she dismissed it as something she'd eaten, but when it continued for 3 days, then a week, she began to wonder. Her monthly cycle, which had returned a few months after Hope's birth, was late. Her breasts felt tender. She was exhausted despite getting decent sleep. She waited another week before mentioning it to Colt, afraid to hope, afraid to disappoint. "I think I might be pregnant again," she finally said one evening after Hope had been put to bed. Colt's fork clattered to his plate. "Are you sure?" "No, but the signs are there. The same ones I had with Hope." Evelyn twisted her napkin nervously. "I'm going to see Dr. Hutchinson tomorrow. I need to know for certain before I let myself believe it." The doctor's examination the next day confirmed what Evelyn had suspected. She was approximately 6 weeks pregnant with their second child. "This is extraordinary," Dr. Hutchinson said, shaking his head in wonder. "Twice. Mrs. Danner, you've conceived twice with a condition that should have prevented any pregnancy at all. I've been reviewing medical journals, consulting with colleagues in Denver, and even back east. No one has documented a case quite like yours." "Is it dangerous?" Evelyn asked, her hand instinctively moving to her still flat stomach. "Will this pregnancy be riskier than the last?" "All pregnancies carry risk, especially given your history. But you carried Hope to term successfully, delivered her safely. That gives me hope that your body has somehow adapted, that whatever malformation I initially observed isn't as limiting as I believed." He smiled. "I'll monitor you closely as before. But Mrs. Danner, I think you might want to consider that you're not quite as infertile as we all thought." The news transformed their household. Colt was even more protective this time, if that was possible, hovering over Evelyn until she had to remind him she'd managed one pregnancy already and knew what she was doing. Hope, oblivious to the changes coming, continued her cheerful destruction of anything within reach, keeping them both busy and entertained. This pregnancy felt different from the first. Evelyn was less afraid, more confident in her body's ability to nurture life. She was also busier, chasing after an active 1-year-old while dealing with morning sickness and exhaustion. But the fear was still there, buried beneath the confidence. The fear that asking for 2 miracles was tempting fate. The winter was mild that year, and by the time Evelyn began to show in early spring, the ranch was already greening up nicely. Colt had purchased the land from Tom Jenkins and was working himself nearly to exhaustion expanding their operation. They hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, and the house felt suddenly full of life and activity. In April, when Evelyn was 5 months along, Sarah visited with her own children in tow. She'd had another baby since Hope's birth, a son named Daniel, and the 2 women sat in Evelyn's kitchen while their children played on the floor, comparing pregnancy notes and laughing at the chaos of motherhood. 2 miracles, Sarah marveled, her hand on Evelyn's swollen belly. "Evelyn, do you realize what an astonishing thing this is? You were told you'd never have children, and here you are, expecting your second." "Sometimes I still can't believe it's real," Evelyn admitted. "I keep waiting to wake up and find it was all a dream." "It's not a dream. It's your life, the life you fought for and deserved." Sarah squeezed her hand. "And I'm so incredibly happy for you." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, much to everyone's relief. Dr. Hutchinson examined Evelyn monthly, then weekly as her due date approached, each time expressing amazement at how well she was carrying the baby. Hope, now walking and starting to form words, seemed to sense something was changing. She became more clingy with Evelyn, wanting to be held constantly, patting her mother's belly with curious hands. "Baby," Evelyn would tell her, guiding Hope's hand to where the new baby kicked. "That's your baby brother or sister." Hope would giggle and say something that sounded vaguely like baby, then demand to be picked up, apparently deciding she preferred being the baby herself. Labor started on a warm June evening, nearly 2 years to the day after Hope's birth. This time, Evelyn recognized the signs immediately and calmly informed Colt that it was time. They'd prepared better this time. Martha Jenkins came to watch Hope. Dr. Hutchinson arrived within the hour, and Evelyn labored in the same bedroom where Hope had been born, feeling both anxious and strangely nostalgic. This labor was faster than the first, more intense but somehow more manageable. Evelyn knew what to expect now, knew what her body was capable of. And when Dr. Hutchinson finally said, "It's a boy," and placed the squirming, crying baby in her arms, Evelyn felt that same overwhelming rush of love she'd felt with Hope. "Samuel," she said, looking down at her son's red, angry face. "Samuel James Danner." Colt, who'd been pale and terrified throughout the labor despite having done this before, let out a sob of relief and joy. "A son," he whispered. "We have a son." Dr. Hutchinson checked both mother and baby thoroughly before finally declaring them both healthy. "Two miracle babies," he said, sitting back with an expression of wonder. "Mrs. Danner, you've single-handedly rewritten my understanding of reproductive medicine. I'll be publishing a paper about your case, with your permission, of course, and with your identity protected." "As long as it helps other women," Evelyn said, exhausted but happy. "If there are other women out there who've been told they can't have children, maybe our story will give them hope." The years that followed were full and rich in ways Evelyn had never imagined possible. Hope and Samuel grew up together on the ranch, becoming best friends and constant companions. Hope was protective of her younger brother, showing him how to climb trees and catch frogs and ride the patient old mare Colt kept for the children. Samuel idolized his sister, following her everywhere, his cheerful laugh echoing through the house. Evelyn resumed teaching, but this time from home, tutoring the children of neighboring ranchers who were too far from town to attend the regular school. Her reputation as an excellent teacher spread, and soon she had more students than she could handle. Colt built an addition onto the house, a proper schoolroom with desks and blackboards and shelves for books. And 3 mornings a week, the ranch house became a one-room school. The ranch prospered beyond their expectations. Colt's hard work and business sense, combined with the skills Evelyn had taught him, made them one of the most successful operations in the territory. They employed several ranch hands year-round, and during busy seasons even more. The house was expanded again and then again, growing from a simple ranch house into something approaching a manor. But success didn't change them fundamentally. They remained the same people who'd fallen in love over terrible coffee and reading lessons, who defied a town's gossip to build a life together. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. They still read together by firelight. They still looked at each other across the dinner table with the same love and wonder they'd felt in those early days. And then, impossibly, miraculously, when Hope was 7 and Samuel was 5, Evelyn discovered she was pregnant again. 3 times, Dr. Hutchinson said, now elderly but still practicing. 3 children from a woman I diagnosed as permanently infertile. Mrs. Danner, you are a walking medical mystery, and I am in awe. This 3rd pregnancy resulted in twin girls, born on a snowy December morning when Evelyn was 42 years old. They named them Emma and Grace, and their arrival completed the family in ways Evelyn hadn't known were missing. Silver Creek had changed over the years as well. Mrs. Patterson had passed away, bitter and alone. Mrs. Henderson had retired, passing the general store to her son. New families had moved in, and the old gossips who'd made Evelyn's life miserable were either gone or silent. The story of the barren schoolteacher who'd borne 4 children had become local legend, told and retold until it took on mythic proportions. But for Evelyn, it was simply her life. The impossible life she'd built with Colt, brick by brick, choice by choice, miracle by miracle. 20 years after that terrible September day in Dr. Hutchinson's office, Evelyn stood on her porch watching her children play in the yard. Hope was 24 now, engaged to marry a good man from a neighboring ranch. Samuel was 22, working the ranch with his father, already proving to be a natural horseman and rancher. The twins were 13, still at home, still filling the house with noise and laughter and the particular chaos that only teenage girls could create. Colt emerged from his barn and walked across the yard toward her, his hair now touched with silver, his face weathered by years of outdoor work, but his eyes still that same brilliant blue that had captured her heart at the harvest fair so long ago. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "Everything," Evelyn said honestly. "That day Dr. Hutchinson told me I'd never have children. The weeks I spent convinced my life was over. Meeting you, being brave enough to hope again." She gestured at the scene before them. "All of this. Any regrets?" "Not a single one." Evelyn leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body against hers. Well, maybe one. I regret every moment I spent believing I was broken or worthless or less than whole. You were never any of those things, Colt said firmly. Even before the children, even when we thought hope was impossible, you were always enough, Evelyn. I know that now. She turned to look at him. Do you ever wonder what our lives would have been like if I hadn't been able to have children? If hope really had been impossible? Colt was quiet for a moment, considering. Sometimes, he admitted, but not with regret. If we'd never had children, we would have found other ways to build a meaningful life. We would have traveled, maybe, adopted, poured ourselves into the ranch and the community. We would have been happy because we had each other. He smiled. The children are incredible gifts. Don't misunderstand me. But they're additions to what we already had, not the foundation of it. You're the foundation, Evelyn. You always were. How did I get so lucky? Evelyn whispered, tears pricking her eyes, though whether from emotion or simply the way her eyes watered more easily these days, she wasn't sure. Luck had nothing to do with it, Colt said, kissing her temple. You were brave. You took a chance on a cowboy who couldn't read properly and didn't give a damn what the town thought. You fought for happiness when everyone told you it was impossible. That's not luck, love. That's courage. In the yard, Hope called out to her siblings, organizing them into some game. Samuel pretended to protest, but quickly joined in, his laughter carrying clear across the evening air. The twins shrieked with delight, chasing their older brother around the yard. It was chaos and noise and exactly the kind of life Evelyn had mourned as impossible all those years ago. Do you remember what you said that night when those men threatened me? Evelyn asked. The night you proposed? I said a lot of things that night, Colt replied with a smile. You said you loved me exactly as I was, that you didn't care what I could or couldn't give you because I'd already given you purpose and joy and a reason to build a future. Evelyn turned in his arms to face him fully. I think about those words often, because they were true then, and they're still true now. The children are wonderful, but they're not why we work. We work because we chose each other when it was hard, when the world said it was foolish, when hope seemed impossible. We did choose each other, Colt agreed, and I'd make the same choice again every single day. They stood together on the porch as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose and deep purple. The children's laughter echoed through the valley, and smoke rose from the chimney of the home they'd built together. In the distance, Evelyn could see the lights of Silver Creek beginning to glow as lamps were lit against the gathering darkness. It was an ordinary evening, the kind they'd shared thousands of times before. But it was also extraordinary. Proof that impossible things became possible when you were brave enough to hope for them, when you found someone who saw your worth, even when the world said you had none, when you chose love over fear. Come inside, Evelyn said finally, as the evening air grew cool. The children will be hungry, and I need to start supper. In a minute, Colt said, pulling her closer. I just want to stand here with you a little longer. So they stood, wrapped in each other's arms, watching their impossible family play in the yard of their impossible home, living their impossible life. And Evelyn thought about that young woman who'd walked out of Dr. Hutchinson's office, convinced her world had ended, and she wished she could go back and tell her that endings were sometimes just beginnings in disguise, that broken things could still bloom, that the whispers about being barren and alone would one day be replaced by laughter and love and a house full of miracles. But she couldn't go back, could only move forward. So she squeezed her husband's hand, called her children in for supper, and stepped into the warm, bright house that had been built on hope and love, and the stubborn refusal to accept that impossible meant never. And as the door closed behind them, shutting out the gathering night, Evelyn heard Hope's voice asking what was for dinner, Samuel's teasing response, the twins giggling, and Colt's deep laugh joining the chorus. This was her life. The life that shouldn't have existed, but did. The life that proved miracles weren't just real, they were worth fighting for, worth hoping for, worth believing in even when everyone said you were foolish. The woman they'd called barren had borne 4 children. The woman they'd pitied had found joy. The woman they'd whispered about had proven them all wrong. And now, surrounded by the family that medical science said was impossible, Evelyn Moore Danner finally understood the truth that had eluded her in that terrible September. Her worth had never been tied to her ability to bear children, but somewhere along the way, bearing children had helped her see her own worth. It was a subtle distinction, but an important one. She hadn't needed children to be whole. She'd been whole all along. But loving them, raising them, watching them grow, had taught her to love herself, to see herself through Colt's eyes rather than through the harsh judgment of a small-minded town. And that, perhaps, was the greatest miracle of all. Not the impossible pregnancies or the healthy births or the 4 thriving children, but the journey from broken to whole, from worthless to valued, from alone to beloved. That transformation couldn't be explained by medicine or science or logic. It could only be explained by hope and love and the courage to keep believing even when belief seemed foolish. As Evelyn set the table for supper, listening to her family's cheerful chaos, she smiled. The whispers had been wrong. She hadn't been infertile and alone. She'd been waiting for the right moment, the right person, the right miracle. And when it came, in the form of a Texas cowboy with sky-blue eyes and a heart big enough to hold all her broken pieces, she'd been brave enough to reach for it. That bravery had changed everything. And now, 20 years later, in a house full of love and laughter and the beautiful impossible, Evelyn finally understood that some stories don't end where they seem to. They just begin in a different way, and the words "the end" are really just another way of saying happily ever after.